Today, on Here is the Horror.
Wait till we try the alpaca meat next. You don't know.
Worth anything
No one
like they are here.
alpacas.
It's just the color.
You don't get a lot of milk from that. I want those alpacas back in the bar by 10 o'clock.
You got it, Dad.
10 o'clock!
You were supposed to feed the alpaca.
They are alpacas. Alpacas.
Hello, and welcome to Here is the Horror. I'm Adam,
And I'm Daniel.
and if you're looking for the horror, here it is. After a brief hiatus, life events and then the holiday season made us pack things up for a little while.
My bad.
Well, not just your bad, because the holidays would have taken me out for a week or two anyways, but hopefully we can be a little more organized this coming year.
Yeah, it'd be nice.
On the plus side, that did give me at least plenty of time to catch up on horror movies.
I watched some stuff too.
And after such a long hiatus, I don't really want to waste much time, so why don't we just go ahead and jump straight into the current horror.
Oh, it works for me.
So I guess speaking of the holiday season, I'll start with I watched Shudder's Creepshow Holiday Special, which was pretty great. I assume you saw that too.
No, I have not got to see that yet, and I really, really want to.
Okay, I'll try to keep it a bit spoiler-free then.
It's animated, isn't it?
It is not. It does, does like the normal Creepshow stuff where occasionally it cuts to comic panels. It kind of did something I thought was kind of ingenious where it does have a whole lot of practical effects in it, so this isn't like a huge budget cut thing, but it does have one or two moments where things get really over the top, and it uses the comic panel format for those bits, which I thought was nice. But it is incredibly funny.
I've really, really enjoyed the revival, the series. I always liked the movie, so the revival series is good, and I can't wait for season 2 to come out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I haven't even made it through much of the revival series yet, but I'm slowly working on it.
It's very good.
Well, I guess since you haven't seen it, and for anyone else that hasn't seen it, I don't really want to spoil much about it because it really gives away the jokes, but it's basically just a 44-minute episode about a person going to a church called St. Argento's. Nice Dario Argento reference there. And basically he's going to a Shapeshifters Anonymous meeting because he's recently become one and he is not sure what to do about it. And so he's meeting with these shapeshifters on Christmas Eve to discuss it, and things just rapidly spiral into all kinds of crazy directions. It's just repeating myself at this point, but it was incredibly hilarious.
I could very easily see that.
Something else more modern I watched was the 2019 movie Polaroid, directed by Lars Klevberg, who did the 2019 Child's Play. That one I don't really have too much to say. That just seemed kind of like the norm for modern horror movies, I guess.
Yeah, I like Polaroid. It reminds me very much of the films that kind of followed up after the J-horror remake explosion from 2 decades ago, give or take. Like you said, with modern horror, a very typical thing, a haunted object, ghost, urban legend / creepypasta type adaptations.
Yeah, it was very similar to the urban legend films vibe.
It made me think of movies like The Bye-Bye Man, The Midnight Man, Slender Man, Final Wish.
Yeah, I'd say most of it I wasn't too into. Probably the most appealing parts was just kind of the ways they tried to play with the physics of the camera. Like if you have a photo of somebody and then the photo gets sent on... I suppose I should go ahead and say the basics of the plot is just anytime you take a photo of somebody, the people in the photo gradually get killed. But it also has its internal physics where anything that happens to a photo of a person also happens to the person. So if they try to burn a photo to get rid of it, then the people in the photo will start burning.
Kind of the same thing in Truth or Dare or Unfriended.
Yeah, I also kept thinking of that old Are You Afraid of the Dark episode that was basically the same plot.
Oh, the Tell the Curious Camera?
Yeah. Although there was also that, the original Final Destination, or no, not the original, it was the second one where they took the photo at the amusement park, and then the photo was letting them know who was going to die next. And I also watched a couple older things, but before I get into those, the only other modern thing I watched was aside from stuff relevant to today's main topic, was I saw that a second season of the modern Are You Afraid of the Dark was going to be coming out soon. So I watched the 2018 Are You Afraid of the Dark reboot, not all of it, but the first episodes just straight up on YouTube as a teaser, so I went ahead and watched that, and I was kind of surprised how good that was. I mean, one, it was just a lot more legitimate, like, horror than I expected, really strong Nightmare on Elm Street vibes in the early bits of it.
It seems like they made an all-out push with that reboot, even though, slight spoilers, it doesn't really follow the framework set up in the original Are You Afraid of the Dark series and the follow-up, but I really enjoyed the way they did it. It seemed like it had really good budget. Production values were on par with modern day, like they didn't go the budget route with it. It doesn't look like an early 90s Canadian kids program.
No, it looks great. Part of why I hadn't watched it yet was that I'd seen that it was not an anthology format about them telling stories. It was actually about the Midnight Society, the kids telling the stories, experiencing a horror situation themselves, and I wasn't too into that, just like I kind of wasn't into it with the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark movie. But it ended up working way better than I thought it did. And the whole setup they have towards getting the new girl in town exposed to the Midnight Society was more entertaining than I expected it to be, and the whole thing was thick with horror references all over the place.
Yes. It was jam-packed with Easter eggs left and right.
Like, they go to Herbert West Middle School, and the main character has a Lovecraft book in her backpack, and all the characters' last names are all horror references. Like, the main character's last name is Carpenter, and the other characters are like Graham Raimi, Adam Lynch, Luis Fulci, Gavin Coscarelli, Don Coscarelli, who did Phantasm. The only one I couldn't pick out was Akiko Yamato, and I don't know what that was supposed to be a reference to. I went through all the big J horror that I could think of looking for Yamatos, but couldn't find any.
It's funny you say that because I've been watching through a lot of Are You Afraid of the Dark lately because I'm researching my top 10 episodes list, and while doing that I came across a podcast that I really enjoyed. Well, I'm in the middle of enjoying.
Oh, about Are You Afraid of the Dark specifically?
Yeah, it's called Up All Night and Are You Afraid of the Dark podcast. It's two friends who grew up together. One of them lives in Australia now. One of them still lives in the States. But they are doing a rewatch podcast. And one of them remembers watching it when he was younger. And his friend who lives in Australia didn't watch it as a child. So all the episodes are new to him. And they have some really funny takes on episodes and characters. But I can already tell just from the research I've been doing behind certain episodes and rewatching that some of my list will probably fit in with the fan base. And some of it's probably going to touch a nerve.
Well, I think everyone has pretty different lists, and I think that's one of the good things about it.
Everyone loves a ghastly grinner, and I hate that episode.
I have mixed feelings about it. The aesthetics in that episode felt stronger than they normally are in most episodes. That episode stands out a lot, but I'm not sure that it's one of my favorites. It's been too long since I've seen that one, honestly. Yeah, but I mean, there's even just a scene in that first episode of the Are You Afraid of the Dark reboot where the people in it are filming a horror movie, and the zombie in that segment looks scarier than any monsters you would have seen in the original series.
Yes. My biggest problem with the entire new series is that the main villain looks like Brandon Urie in a Panic at the Disco music video.
Yeah, that's definitely the weakest point for me. I kept waiting for him to turn into something more spooky, and maybe he does in the other two episodes, which I haven't seen yet, but...
Well, if Aaron Taggart wasn't dead, they probably could have used Vink with a va.
Although that reminds me, I did see in the new one that's about to be coming out that they are going to have Sardo in it. Not the same actor, but the one they have was good enough that I had to go back and check and make sure it wasn't the same guy.
No, you can't replace Sardo. It's Sardo. No Mr. Accent on the dough. I'm losing out on the deal. I love Sardo so much. He's very much so the epitome of the sniveling, cowardly, used car snake oil salesman.
Pretty much the cause of the horror in every episode he's in, accidentally. But, yeah, no, I know we're both big fans of that series, so probably better move on, or else this is just going to become an episode about Are You Afraid of the Dark?
True.
My one last thing I do want to say, though, is that I was looking up all the actors, and there's a point where they do tell a story that ends up setting up the premise for the episode, and in that story, the mother in it is played by the actress that was the main character in The Tale of the Lonely Ghost from the original series.
Oh.
Right. Outside of that, finally watched the Video Dead, which I think you mentioned on our last episode.
I love that movie.
Oh, I'm glad you do. I have mixed feelings about it.
Possessed toothbrushing.
The early bits of it I enjoyed a lot. It had that nice 80s vibe, with haunted TV and zombies coming out of it, and then the zombies are just kind of gremlins in throughout the house. I don't know if it's because they're dead or because they've been dead so long, but they're just going around playing with the blenders and laughing and
the washing machine
putting on wigs.
Zombie?
And the infamous washing machine zombie was all I really knew about this going in.
See, that movie is the perfect example of how not to add horror Easter eggs to your film, because that movie in every scene is just slapping you in the face going, we're a scary movie. Did you notice that? Hey, we're a horror film. Did you see that? Did you see that?
Yeah, but then you get to the back half of the movie and suddenly it turns into a completely different film where now it's just this kid being drug around by this man that's hunting the zombies. The rest of the film's just kind of cheaply done, and they're just in the woods pursuing these zombies, and he strings up the kid to try to lure the zombies out, and that whole section just shot into D movie tier.
Yeah.
Speaking of D tier, though, I also went to watch Night of the Demon. I thought it was going to be the 1957 version or the 1988 version.
Oh, you watched the 2000s version.
No, I watched the 1979 version, which is very cheaply done, and it's basically just about an anthropologist leading a class of his students to try to find a Bigfoot.
Oh.
And it was so bad that it was thoroughly entertaining. We were riff tracksing that thing to death the whole way through. It's there's some person that claimed they saw Bigfoot, and then they're just hiding out in the trailer, and this teacher takes his whole class to go see the guy, and then the guy doesn't want to talk to them, so the teacher tells all the students to just camp in his front yard until he'll tell them about Bigfoot.
I'm pretty sure that one's been on an MST 3K or Riff Tracks.
Possibly. I had heard of this version before, but I'd pretty much forgotten about it. I think I just ran into it when I was doing research for an earlier episode about censorship stuff, and I saw that it was on the video nasties list because of all the prolonged scenes of the Bigfoot killing people, most of which got cut. But, in those scenes,
Did they make them a Match.com profile?
No, not this time, sadly. That's probably still the superior Bigfoot film, but there's so many kill scenes in this where, there's a scene where somebody goes outside the van, gets killed by the Bigfoot, and then the Bigfoot slaps them on the windshield, so the girl inside starts screaming. And I don't know how long it is, but it felt like 5 minutes straight of just this person slowly sliding down the windshield, and this girl screaming, running out of breath, screaming, and it just went on too comically long. It was ridiculous. But I guess that's the only things I have to talk about that aren't too pertinent to our main topic today.
Well, recently I watched Porno. It's streaming, I believe, exclusively on Shudder right now. It's a 2020 film about these kids that live in this super conservative town. Their boss is super conservative, and they watch a movie that basically releases a succubus. It was okay. I'm not in a big rush to watch it again. The acting was pretty good. Some of the effects are pretty good.
I've almost watched that one many of these weeks for the show.
It was very middling, in my opinion. I watched the 2019 film, The Mortuary Collection. It has Clancy Brown as a caretaker of a funeral home, and it's an anthology film where a girl comes to interview for a job at the funeral home. It reminded me a lot of Tales from the Hood because he's taking her from room to room, and when she sees a body, he tells her a story behind it, and that's the framework for the whole thing.
Oh, that's the same as that one that John Carpenter was the front man for.
Body Bags.
Body Bags, yes.
I love Body Bags.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
My favorite segment from the film was probably the third one. It's about this young couple that have just got married, and shortly after they get married, the man's wife contracts some kind of debilitating illness, and she basically becomes vegetative, and he has to feed her and take care of it, and it just goes all out from there. I don't want to spoil too much. It's a relatively new movie. It's really good, but if you get a chance, you should check it out. It's a very good blend of horror and comedy. I did catch the Supernatural series finale. I got caught up on the back half of the season, the final season, and then watched the series finale. I enjoyed it a lot. There was a lot less loose end tying up than I've come to expect from a series finale. A lot of that had to do with the COVID situation and everything. Half of the final season got delayed because of that. So the episode And it's a good thing. The episode focuses very much on Sam and Dean. I got a little choked up, I'm not gonna lie. I got a little choked up watching it. There were some good callbacks. There were some really nice moments in it. But it seems to me, I agree with Jared Padalecki, the final episode kind of shows that Dean won. Dean got what he had wanted the whole time. And that's kind of weird as you're watching it to see that. But after you finished it, it was a very good bow to tie the series up in. Really, the penultimate episode, I was kind of expecting to be the finale. I assumed it was going to be a two-parter when it started drawing close to the end, and when it wasn't, I was like, what the hell? So the series finale really goes back to the very early roots of the series, the Monster of a Week standalone episodes that would happen, and it's kind of completely detached from the rest of the season finale. This episode really could have fit in anywhere in the series.
In a way. I mean, I probably haven't watched enough Supernatural to really say, but just from what you said, that kind of sounds like it might have been a happy accident, them being forced to kind of do some stuff more like season 1 during the last season. Just probably interesting to see how they do that same format so many years later.
Oh, yeah, I definitely agree with that. Even more horrifying in Supernatural-related news is that Jared Padalecki is now playing Walker in the rebooted Walker Texas Ranger series.
Oh, that's bizarre.
Yeah, I was never a big fan of the Chuck Norris series, but it's Jared Padalecki, so I'm going to have to check it out. Which it's not supposed to be nearly as campy or hokey as the original series either, so...
Well, I never watched the original series, so I can't really comment much, but I do know it's one of those things. Maybe it's just because that series was so big, but it seems like anytime I'm looking into writers or actors for anything, there's almost like a 20% chance I'm going to see Walker Texas Ranger in their credits somewhere.
I could very easily believe that. It was a better choice than the series where Chuck Norris is an old hermit living out in the woods that can shapeshift into a bear.
He's already a bear. What do you mean?
The last thing I've seen recently is the Netflix film I'm Thinking of Ending Things. It's a 2020 film, and I cannot say enough good, bad things about the movie. I discussed it with you slightly, but that lead feeling in the pit of your stomach when you're nauseous and you're sick and you think you're going to throw up, this is the audio-visual representation of that feeling. Like, the movie isn't a horror film. It's really a drama or a romantic movie, but there's enough surreal psychological aspect to the film that I think at the very least it should be a psychological thriller. I've watched a lot of movies in my lifetime, and this film by far made me feel more uneasy than any other film I've seen in my life. And it was directed by Charlie Kaufman of Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind fame. He also did the screenplay for it and is a producer for it. In a lot of ways, it's Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind turned up to 10. It's very unnerving. I definitely recommend watching it if you're a fan of Charlie Kaufman or if you're a horror fan, because contrary to what the film is labeled as, it's a psychological horror. Right up there with Jacob's Ladder and In the Mouth of Madness.
Okay, so the surrealism, is it pretty in line with like Jacob's Ladder and Eternal Sunshine?
There's very distinct things that will happen, like during the film, the main character's parents will jump in age. At one point, they will appear to be in their late 30s, early 40s, and then it'll jump to a scene where one of them is bedridden and looks like they're in their 70s, and the other one's having to feed them by spoon, and then it'll jump back to a previous scene in the movie, and they'll be referencing a conversation from a half hour ago in the film, or they will be referencing a conversation that has not taken place at all in the film. Very, very uneasy feeling, and it's very easy to get lost in, at least for me, the first time you watch it, because you're kind of expecting, the whole time you're expecting the exposition and a reason behind this, and it does a very good job at building that tension.
Does it eventually have like the big explanation of why all this surrealism is happening?
That would be spoiling, and I'm not going to do it.
Anything else, or are we ready to move on to news?
That's all for me.
All right. I guess since John Carpenter's on my mind, because you made me think about body bags, I'll start with that. Of course, he was the composer for tons of horror movies, Halloween, In the Mouth of Madness, not a horror movie, but Escape from New York. But he's been releasing some studio albums called Lost Themes in recent years. And they're not unused tracks. It's new stuff he's writing. He just calls it Lost Themes. The third one, Lost Themes 3, Alive After Death, is coming out on February 5th, and a music video for the title track from that just came out. It's kind of a lightly animated, almost like a motion comic, maybe a little more than a motion comic. It's got like skeletons, ghosts, flesh trains, so some nice horror vibes in it. And the music does sound a lot like his soundtracks. It has that sort of 80s synth-heavy horror movie aesthetic. There is some guitar work too. It's pretty retro-wave overall, but I just thought I'd mention that.
When I hear the words flesh train together, it makes me think of a completely different genre of film. Though they sometimes parody horror movies.
That's the true horror.
Except for that one horrible meme I saw of a flesh-made Thomas the Train.
That's why my tracks carry me forward. I was also keeping an eye on what's going on with Hellraiser still. That series continues to be a mess. So after a long sequence of films that barely related to the original ones, and we had that reboot attempt that I'm not going to say much about, and then Judgment in 2018, which I guess tried to get back to the core mythos and flush it out more. But then now we're back to a new reboot being worked on by David Buckner, and now we don't really know what's happening with that because Clive Barker finished winning the domestic rights back to the original. I think we talked about it in a prior episode, but U.S. copyright law allows the original author to recall copyright after 35 years, and Hellbound Heart was published in 1986. So the TV series that was supposed to be in production, Clive Barker is the executive producer for that, so that should still be a go. And I presume that reboot's probably, I don't know, I suppose it's still early enough that it could get killed by that, but most likely they'll probably just rework it or reach an agreement with Clive Barker.
I'd definitely be looking forward to that. The Books of Blood on Hulu released late last year.
And I guess, speaking of that, that makes me think of the Friday the 13th, which supposedly the court case for that wrapped up a while back, but we still haven't heard anything. I don't know, I assume some appeals are going on or something, who knows, but Never Hike in the Snow, the sequel to Never Hike Alone, came out, and also Voorhees. Both of those came out in November, giving us 2 more good fan films. We do also have Jason Rising, another fan film, scheduled to release on June 13th this year. I'm really looking forward to that one, because anything they've shown from it looks like it has some surprisingly good special effects for a fan film. And I've been keeping a close eye on that upcoming horror game, The Medium, from Bloober Team. They came out with a 15-minute gameplay trailer for it. I had heard that game had an alternate world and a normal world, so I just assumed you'd be going back and forth between them, Silent Hill style. And it seems like sometimes that's going to be what happens, but the trailer actually showed an odd segment where you're consecutively in both of them, and it's split screen. So you can see, like, while you're walking around in both, you can see the normal world on one half of the screen and the other world on the other side, and some things will be different, like a door somewhere but it's rotted away in the other world, or there's stairs in the real world but those stairs have rotted away in the other world so you can't go up them. But you can do like out-of-body experiences where your real body stays there but you switch to playing only in the other world, but you can't be away from your body too long, so you have to run and do stuff in the other room and then jump back to your body. So it looks pretty puzzly and pretty interesting. I see a lot of good gameplay stuff they could do with that, and I'm pretty interested in it. As for the other world itself, if you were wondering, because Silent Hill usually has that rust aesthetic, although they put little different touches on it in each game. The other world in this one looks like what I think of when I think of the underworld. A lot of walls made of bones and just mucky bone stuff everywhere. A lot of walls full of faces. Some really great art design there. And I also saw a hidey bit where there's a big monster going around. You have to push in the R stick to hold your breath.
All we gotta do is wait 55 years for the first Silent Hill to go into public domain, assuming that video games are added into the public domain copyright laws by then.
I don't think that would count because
for
things like for the Hellbound Heart, that was made by one person, so Clive Barker indisputably owns it. Silent Hill was made under contract for Konami, so Konami's going to be who owns it no matter what. And of course that's why Friday the 13th is stuck in limbo, is because that whole legal battle was about whether or not the writer was an employee or freelance at the time.
Yeah, the last update I saw on that was where the agreement they were kind of reaching was that the writer was going to own Friday the 13th, and the name Jason Voorhees, but
Yeah, he'd pretty much own anything from the original specifically, but nothing else for the rest of the franchise.
yes, so they could continue to make Friday the 13th films with a guy in a hockey mask killing people. They just couldn't refer to him as Jason Voorhees. And they couldn't call them Friday the 13th. I mean, either way, I'm happy everyone by now who's listening knows how I feel about the first Friday the 13th film. I respect it for what it is. It's got some good kills, nice Tom Savini work, but I'm a Jason man. I'm not a Friday the 13th man.
So anyways, yeah, The Medium, that just came out on January 8th for Xbox Series X and PC. I think my PC specs are a little too low for it, because I've been holding off on upgrading. I'm trying to hold out for one more year of video card upgrades, but I might pick it up anyways and see how it goes. Well, I guess while I'm on the horror video game front, I played a lot of that Mansions of Madness board game, and for a while they were making a PC game for it called Mansions of Madness Mother's Embrace, and then that got quietly cancelled after a while, but apparently that's alive again, and they've just rebranded it as Arkham Horror Mother's Embrace, which I suppose makes sense. I've come to realize both the Mansions of Madness board game line and the Eldritch Horror board game line, apparently both of those wrapped up, and they're done doing expansions for them, so with that being the case, I suppose they decide to rebrand it to one of their horror board game series that they're still doing.
They seem to be focusing hardcore on the Mansions of Madness product line right now and the Arkham Horror trading card game. Or not, it's not a trading card game.
Living card game, yeah.
Yes, living card game, which is really fun.
Yeah, they wrapped up Eldritch Horror and Mansions of Madness, and now it seems like they're trying to do a better job of just branding everything under Arkham Horror, so now they just have Arkham Horror, the living card game, Arkham Horror, and there's another board game that is just Arkham Horror with a subtitle, but I've been thinking about getting that one lately, because I finally finished getting everything for Eldritch Horror and everything for Mansions, except for the print-on-demand stuff from the first edition.
I'm not printing my own game files.
No, you don't print them, it's just they make them as you order them.
Oh, yeah. I was thinking of the websites where you can order this board game, but it's print and play is what I was thinking of, not print on demand.
Oh, that reminds me, I probably should have said this earlier in the show, but for the holiday season, I did end up getting a lot of horror stuff. I got a Hammer Horror Blu-ray collection, and I got some Arkham Horror stuff, because I actually I'd played Mansions of Madness and Eldritch Horror. I hadn't actually played Arkham Horror, so I have that now. And one of the few non-horror related things I got was a book for a tabletop fantasy RPG called Mythorog. Mythorog's just an abbreviation for Mythical Fantasy Role-Playing Game, so I thought, okay, this is my one not horror-related gift. But it was written by Varg Vikernes, who's the man behind the band Burzum, and it turns out that Burzum is playing in a scene in the 2019 Color Out of Space movie, so kind of an odd coincidence there. But otherwise, only other things I really had was, the mentioning of that Are You Afraid of the Dark reboot getting a second season titled Are You Afraid of the Dark Curse of Shadows? That comes out February 12th. Nickelodeon, and they have a trailer for it that shows the Sardo's Magic Mansion and has a cover of Rockwell's Somebody's Watching Me playing over it. Resident Evil Reboot wrapped up and is set to come out in September. On that note, I just gotta say, this autumn is just going to be jam-packed with horror movies, assuming they don't delay them again, because Marvel's Morbius, it was supposed to come out March 19th, and they, just in this past week, pushed that back as well. And what else was there? There was the Halloween that got pushed back. This autumn, I hope that vaccine's good, because there's going to be so many horror movies I'm going to have to go out there, or else if they delay these things again, then 2022 is going to have, most horror movies of any year ever.
Pretty much. You could always do the theater at home that's becoming increasingly popular.
Oh, that's true.
Well, aside from the Are You Afraid of the Dark Season 2 news, all I really had beside that was they've released a trailer for Willy's Wonderland. It's a Nicolas Cage film.
Oh yes, I did mean to say that. I can't believe I forgot that. I saw that and I was just thinking, okay, a Five Nights at Freddy's movies, who care? But that trailer totally turned me around. I'm super hyped for that now.
Well, Five Nights at Freddy's, both of my kids are usually into it, and Scott Cawthon, the creator, has decided to basically take another stab at rewriting a script from scratch. And where we're at now, it looks like the film is realistically going to be made in some time period relatively soon. So I've seen a lot of that kind of influencing films and shorts and such in recent years, like the Banana Splits movie they did, which took a beloved children's show from the 70s and turned it into one of the goriest films I've ever seen. And in the 2019 Halloween bite-sized horror segments, they have one called The Hug, and it is about a Chuck E. Cheese type place where these kids are having a birthday party, and Pandori the panda is like the mascot for Pandori's Pan Pizza Palace. Really catchy theme song for that eatery. Seems to have his own little mean streak. I really enjoyed it. It's probably my favorite of the 2019 Halloween bite-sized horror shorts. And the Banana Splits movie is definitely worth watching. But I got super excited when I finally saw a trailer for this.
I haven't seen the Banana Splits one. Does it have a slow, scary version of the theme song?
Not really.
You don't have the slow children singing music box version of "They're coming down the stairs, they're coming down in pairs."
No, kind of like what they did with the Gallows, where they had the slow cover of "Come As You Are" by Nirvana. No, nothing like that. It's just a straight up send up of these characters in a horror scenario, and it is unapologetic. It knows what it's doing, and it goes full force with it. But with Nicolas Cage, especially in horror films, it's always a flip of a coin. You never know what Nicolas Cage you're gonna get.
I did see. I was kind of laughing because in the trailer, it shows some smashing some stuff up, and there's a point where he verbatim. There's a scene in Color Out of Space where he just chucks a tomato down into the sink, and he does that exact same motion in this.
Yes. And I love his freak out scenes where he's very close to just going ape shit, and he's all like, "Ah, ah." There's usually some intelligible gurgling thrown in there. We get some of that in Color Out of Space, of course.
The Willy's Wonderland trailer seemed to make a point of having him not talk any. I assume that he'll become more vocal in the back half of the movie, of course.
They're alpacas! I can't decide if that's better or worse than "not the bees." Or you should have just put the bunny back.
Yeah, the man has a impressive filmography.
Yes, either he is the world's most skilled troll, or he is literally just having fun, no matter what he's doing.
Well, I'm sure we'll end up talking about him more once we actually get to the 2019 Color Out of Space. I'm going to try to bite my tongue right now.
Yeah, probably for the best.
Alright, today's main topic is H.P. Lovecraft's Color Out of Space. This is a story about a meteorite that came down to Earth, and then everything in the vicinity around it began to be affected in strange ways. Of course, in the last episode, I think it was, I said that I'd watched the 2019 Color Out of Space adaptation done by Richard Stanley, but what made me decide to do this episode actually was that during our hiatus when I knew you weren't going to be able to record for a while, before the holiday season hit, I thought I could get one more episode out. So I was reaching out to a friend of mine at work to see if he wanted to do an episode with me, and we were just going over some things that he could do quickly on short notice, and he was a big fan of the 1987 film The Curse.
As everyone should be.
So I said, okay, cool, let's do that. And I started looking into it and saw, oh, that's a Color Out of Space adaptation. So I thought, well, at this point, since I've seen the most recent one and I'm going to be watching this one, I should brush up on the original story. And one thing led to another, and that episode ended up not happening. But that gave me plenty of time to go ahead and watch every adaptation, because I discovered that there's actually been a surprising number of them. I think when people think of H.P. Lovecraft, they normally think of Reanimator and the Dunwich Horror and Cthulhu, of course, but surprisingly, Color Out of Space seems to be up there on the list of his things that have had the most adaptations.
When you get into Lovecraft film adaptations, when you really start to look into it, it's insane how many movies have been released that are adaptations of Lovecraft work, where they just take the basic framework from the story and change everything else, including the name.
Mm-hmm. So I think we talked about this a little bit, and I think the best way to do it is we're just going to try to just go in a straight timeline, starting from the original. So the original story, it was published in Amazing Stories in the September 1927 issue. Lovecraft's mostly known for writing in weird tales, but he did write wherever he could get work, of course. And Amazing Stories was more of a sci-fi short story series, although it did occasionally move into other things. This actual issue that he was published in, the cover story is just about people going on an expedition and there being a giant man-eating plant that eats people. Although that same issue actually had the second half of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds in it also.
I think it's worth mentioning, too, he wrote this right on the heels of finishing The Case of Charles Dexter Ward, and both of these are really high up in the echelon of H.P. Lovecraft stories. For good reason. They're both very good stories.
So the story is basically as I said, a meteor comes down to Earth, and I was surprised going through the original story how much the bulk of it doesn't go out of regular science. Basically, an unnamed surveyor shows up to investigate an area for building a dam, and there's a location there called the Blasted Heath where nothing lives or grows and everything's bleached out, and he's trying to figure out what happened there, and everyone in town tells him that the only person that was there was somebody named Ami Pierce. So he goes to visit Ami and is surprised that everyone says that Ami's crazy, but he seems pretty together. And then most of the story is told through Ami relating what happened to the unnamed surveyor. And it's basically just a meteor comes down, and then the locals don't realize what radiation poisoning is, as it slowly makes their plants grow big but be bad, and it slowly kills people. But then once you get to the back end of the story, that's when the Lovecraft stuff finally starts hitting in.
I feel like in this story, too, Lovecraft kind of gives the middle finger to people. When he describes things, a lot of times he uses terms like archaic and eldritch and beyond the scope of mortal thinking. But this one, it's globules of color. They're not relatable to anything in the visible spectrum. It's kind of a cheap shot, but it's also a challenge when you try to adapt something like this, because it's literally not something that exists. To our knowledge.
Yeah, the titular color out of space is basically out of space because it came down on the meteor, but there's something that comes out of the meteor when people hammer into it, and the author can't describe it. He says they describe it as like shimmering and wavering, but it's not really like a gas or a light, and eventually he just, for lack of a better term, says it's kind of like a color, but a color I've never seen or can't describe.
It makes me think of when someone's blowing bubbles outside on a sunny day, and that incandescent, like shimmering rainbow pattern almost, or when oil spills somewhere and water drops on it. That's what I always picture in my head when I think
diffraction.
about it. Yes.
Yeah, I guess I just thought of like spatial distortion when I was reading it. But they do, they take it to labs and try to analyze it, and they do say something about readings on the spectrometer and so on. But then from there, the family slowly, at first it's just stuff like plants grow big, but then they taste bad and rot, and people are seeing like any wildlife near that estate is sometimes weird. People are hitting roadkill, and the roadkill is grotesque, super large rabbits with elongated limbs. And eventually the wife starts going crazy, so Nahum Gardner, the owner of this farm, has to lock his wife in the attic. And he has 3 sons, Thaddeus, Merwin, and Zinnis, and over time things start going weird with them too, and eventually Ami goes back to check in on them and has a scene of Nahum Gardner in his living room, and he's asking where the kids are, and he says, I forget which of the individual children it is, but he says that they live in the well now, and
No, Thaddeus dies in the attic.
And I know eventually they find the bones of 2 of the kids and several animals at the bottom of the well, and it sort of insinuates that whatever came out of that meteor, that sort of transient incorporeal thing that beyond human comprehension, it had apparently moved into the well and was living at the bottom of it and coming out at night to feed or drawing things into it. This whole time everything in that area is slowly getting more and more desaturated. And that's from the whatever's in the well, the color out of space, slowly eating the color out of everything else in the area as it sucks the life out of it all. And then the story keeps pretty mild until you get to the big epic finale where people go to the farm to figure out what's actually happening finally, and then the thing in the well. Unknown if it's because they're there or if they just happen to be there at the wrong time, but that's its moment where it's finished growing and is ready to go back out into space. Spirals up into the sky, but Ami says that he saw when all of the colors were going up, that there was a part of it that couldn't quite make it all the way up there and seemed to descend back down into the well. And over time, that area that's desaturated has just been continuing to slowly grow in the years since. And the story, it pretty much ends with the surveyor saying that they're going to build the dam, but he's not going to drink any water that comes from it.
It's a very claustrophobic story, too, which that's a trope in a lot of Lovecraft stories, is a very claustrophobic setting.
Yeah, well, claustrophobia is always great for horror. But yeah, I was, for a good chunk of this story, I was almost disappointed because I really started to think until I got near the end that it was just going to be about country folk in the middle of nowhere not realizing that they were getting radiation poisoned to death, because that does seem like what it is for about almost 2/3 of the story.
A lot of people think that the story was kind of inspired by the Radium Girl scandal.
Mm-hmm.
And I could kind of see that, but it was basically this group of women starting in the late 1910s, early 1920s, and they worked in a radium factory. There was a couple of different factories these women worked in, and they were all slowly getting radium poisoning.
Yeah, because pretty much their job was to paint glow-in-the-dark numbers on watches, and they were using radium to do that, because people at that point, they were just like, oh cool, it glows in the dark. They didn't realize, oh, it also kills us.
Yep. It gave them glowing teeth, though.
Yeah, because they had the paintbrushes they were using to paint the numbers, and they were just licking that radiation all throughout the day to keep the brushes wet, which ended up causing some court cases that led to a lot of the start of some modern workplace safety laws, but
could have been a lot worse. Well, not to mention that, during that whole thing too, a lot of people tried to just discredit them by painting them as, loose women and stuff like that. It was a big deal for the time.
Well, the story went on to be adapted many times, and I think part of what makes this interesting and part of what made me want to do this episode is that there's so many things in the story that don't play well on film that people tend to take a lot of different approaches to how to tackle it. For one, the protagonist has no name. 2, it's a story within a story, because most of it is being told by Ami to the protagonist. 3, the color out of space itself is described as being unable to be comprehended. So all of those are difficult things for a filmmaker to tackle when they're deciding how to adapt this.
It's definitely one of the tougher stories of Lovecraft's to adapt, because so much of it is so scattered, and as you said, it's set up very much in a way that it gives you a lot of liberty adapting something like this. And at the same time, how do you represent a color that doesn't exist in the visible spectrum?
Mm-hmm. And there's I really like a lot of the different solutions people came up with to that. But one other thing I forgot to mention when talking about the story is that part of the reason that Lovecraft had Ami telling the story to the protagonist is because the story takes place over years. Him recounting the story lets you cover that span quickly, but that's something else that would be difficult to adapt into film. So most film adaptations, of course, end up taking place over a couple days. But
yeah, a very condensed period.
Right, but the earliest one that I'm aware of is Die Monster Die from 1965, also called Monster of Terror in the UK. That was the directorial debut of Daniel Haller, who was an art director and set designer for a lot of the Roger Corman Poe films. I guess he did like Lovecraft, or maybe he just thought it was lucrative, because he would also direct The Dunwich Horror in 1970.
Much better adaptation.
I actually haven't seen that one, but it's on my list. But music composed by Don Banks, who mostly composed for British crime, thriller, and horror movies in the 60s. And the screenplay was written by Jerry Soule, who wrote for Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and some original Star Trek. The opening credits have a ton of different colors swirling around, probably as much to go with the theme of the color out of space as it is just to show off that they had color. This film advertises that it used Pathacolor, but it's not actually. The original Pathacolor was from decades earlier, and it was stencil-based film tinting, where you film in black and white and then add color after, and it stopped being used in the 30s. What they used for this film was the standard, at the time, Eastman Kodak's Eastman color film that came out in the 50s. So this was filmed in color, and a lot of things just had their own brand names for their version of it that they used. And the studio that made this had happened to acquire Pathacolors. Has Steve Reinhardt as the lead, played by Nick Adams. This person pretty much plays the role of, I suppose, the outsider coming into the scenario. But before I go into the cast any further, I should say this one takes extremely heavy liberties with the story. Instead of it being like a farmhouse that a meteor came to, this is more of a old dark house gothic horror.
Well, that, and it basically evolves into a creature feature by the end of it.
At the very end, yeah, the very end is probably the weakest part of the movie. I was enjoying it pretty good until that part. And it does have, of course, Nahum, who is named Nahum Whitley it's the Whitley family instead of the Gardner family in this adaptation.
Which I think probably takes a little bit from the Whateleys in other Lovecraft stories.
Steve Reinhardt goes to see the Whitley family specifically because the daughter of the family, Susan Whitley, went to school with him and asked him to come visit her. But he comes to this rural town of Arkham in England, and nobody in the town will tell him anything about the Whitley family. Nobody will take him there. He eventually just has to begrudgingly walk there after nobody will rent him a car or a bike. Then he gets there, and Nahum Whitley won't let him in the house. But just as he's about to give up and leave, Susan comes downstairs and is delighted that he's there, giving him hugs, asking him how he's been, and takes him to go meet her mom, Letitia Whitley, played by Frida Jackson, who was one of the brides of Dracula in 1960s and one of the witches in the 1980 Clash of the Titans.
Yeah, I really feel like this guy just could not take a hint, literally, to save his life.
I mean, he must have had a really good time with Susan in college.
That's what I'm thinking. He had expectations coming to visit, which, honestly, he should have just proposed to her on the doorstep and took her ass then and there.
Well, for a good chunk of the movie, he quickly realizes things are wrong here. Probably because everybody in the town and even
hates
the
place.
father and the mother, even the father's just like, I cannot tell you why, but you have to leave. And then the mother, when he goes to visit her, she's bedridden, hidden behind a veil, and is telling him that the maid disappeared, that there's a strange mystery here, and asks him to take the daughter away. So at this point, it seems like he should just take her and run, but the daughter, Susan, unfortunately refuses to go. This is her home. She doesn't want to leave, even though everything's clearly super spooky here.
She's just hooked on that sweet, sweet space rock.
I guess. And I almost forgot, there is a butler. The character Boris Karloff plays, Nahum Whitley, is in a wheelchair, and he's constantly being pushed around by his butler, who he's named Marwyn, which was the name of one of the sons in the original story. But since the daughter refuses to leave, and the mother told him that there's spooky stuff going on, the protagonist, he just very quickly decides he has to get down to the bottom of this. He's not leaving this place until he figures out what the deal is. And he does pass by the blasted heath on the way, I should have said, but everything's charred black rather than white. He grabs a tree branch and it crumbles in his hands. But this is a old dark house movie. It's has the mystery plot, has the butler, it has spooky paintings of ancestors that went insane, it has the different family members scheming against each other. Boris Karloff goes down in the basement and they've got chains and altars and skulls on the wall. And that's all in the first 20 minutes of the movie.
Feels like they tried to shoehorn in, and this is something that happens in a lot of Lovecraft adaptations. The filmmakers tend to shoehorn in a lot of occult references to try to ground the story, so to speak. And sometimes it just doesn't work. Lovecraft stories, one of the things they're heralded for is because they're not grounded in what we know in the scientific rules of our world.
Yeah, a lot of Lovecraft stuff tends to kind of get almost rebranded into being satanic cult stuff. Because I guess they don't really know how else to... Or I guess just because the audience understands that. It's quicker to explain that to an audience when you're adapting something, I suppose.
Yeah, I want to write a dissertation about how Hocus Pocus is just an amazing Lovecraftian film.
Well, hopefully the sequel doesn't debunk any of your theories.
The book is so the Necronomicon. The Evil Dead Necronomicon, not the H.P. Lovecraft Necronomicon.
Speaking of, there is a big book that Steve Reinhardt finds in the basement. It does say it's the Cult of the Outer Ones, and it does have a family ancestor that went insane doing a ritual that now affects the house, is what the father and mother say. Apparently they had this old member of the family that set up all this crazy stuff in the basement and is doing rituals, and they think all the bad stuff happening now is because of those rituals. They keep occasionally hearing screams, and the mother, who's bedridden, she eventually moves her hand up past the veil, and she has a nasty hand that's all malformed.
And that is kind of a reference, to me at least. It seems like it's kind of pulling from the story, the Dunwich Horror, and the whole Yog-Sothoth and all that build up, and the family kind of being cursed by a ritual. And
yeah, and I know you said you didn't like this movie too much, but I was, at this point in the film, I was super into it because it was like I was watching a Mansions of Madness game.
Except some people survive in this one. One day I'll survive a scenario.
The butler dies at one point too, and then well, it's kind of funny. He stumbles around several times, but then he eventually collapses during dinner. But then Steve's trying to check on him, but Boris Karloff just tells him, "No, this has happened before. I know what to do. Go away."
Yes, he's died plenty of times. I know how to fix this.
And then, like 5 minutes later, he comes out of the room and goes, "He's dead."
It didn't work this time.
And then Steve goes to check, and there's like a charred outline where the body last was, which I don't think that ever got explained. I guess I can make up my own theories based on the plot, but
Family curse.
we're lingering on a little more than I expected, so I'm going to try to cover the rest pretty quick. But basically, they end up finding that a meteorite landed, and that's that whole black charred area is because a meteor landed, and the crazy grandfather brought it into the house, and the family had since then been doing experiments with it in a locked-up greenhouse, where they'd found that if they put shards of the meteorite in the soil of various plants, they'd grow huge. Speaking of Evil Dead, it has a scene where a bunch of vines wrap around the girl and try to suck her into the plant, but Steve hacks the vines away.
Feed me, Seymour.
It does have one really good scene there where they go to the room in the back with the light off, and then they turn on the light, and there's just like a glass wall with a bunch of like malformed Lovecraftian horrors where that's all the animals that had been exposed to the meteor. That bit was surprisingly good, I thought. But basically, it turns out that all the satanic ritual, all the cult stuff, that was just the family being dumb and crazy, and really it's just radiation poisoning from this meteor doing stuff, not a curse. The mother eventually, I should say, in the original story, the mother got way more affected by the meteor than everybody else. I don't think it specifically says what happened to her. I think the original Lovecraft just has a point where it says that they go in the room and buried what they found.
Yeah.
But that's a running theme through all these adaptations. So in this, the mother eventually turns into a ghoul, more or less, and starts chasing people throughout the house. I don't know what she's going to do when she gets to them, but eventually, after a prolonged Scooby-Doo chase scene, she gets too radiated and collapses, and then it has a nice transition scene of her face turning white and then rapidly decomposing that I thought was pretty good. And from there, the father of the family, Nahum, decides he's going to destroy the meteor, but the maid attacks him and he touches it too much, and he turns into a monster of the week. And it does have a kind of nice suspense bit where it hasn't shown you what happens to him. You just see like irradiated handprints along the wall where he had been stumbling afterwards, and Steve follows him through there, but then he's just a spooky monster Boris Karloff, and then just chases them throughout the mansion for a little while, then falls down at the end. This was released in the US as a double feature with Mario Bava's Planet of the Vampires, and in the UK, it was released with Roger Corman's The Haunted Place, which is considered part of his Poe films, but it really just uses a few lines from the Poe poem of the same name, and it's mostly based on Lovecraft's The Case of Charles Dexter Ward.
Yeah.
So, anyways, in conclusion, I actually thought this was a pretty good film as far as like the spooky dark house genre goes, until you get to the end. Once Boris Karloff turns into a monster, there's no suspense left or anything, and the monster's not very impressive. I think if he had just killed himself trying to destroy the meteor, that probably would have been a much better end to the movie. That last bit should have just been edited off. But then you couldn't call it Die Monster Die if there was no monster.
With Die Monster Die, it's one of those I've tried to watch a few times, and I enjoy it in the early portions, but I've never actually been able to make it all the way through the film, paying apt attention to it. It just loses me too much after a while, and I'm just like, yeah, I'm good. I mean, I've seen White Zombie, so I'm good.
You just gotta pretend it's a Mansions of Madness game, because it was so much. It's all set in one dark house. You know that there's something going on in the greenhouse, but you don't have the key to it, and it's locked, and you could adapt it so easily into a game scenario for that. Yeah, as far as being an adaptation of the original story, it does a terrible job of that. As a standalone movie, I thought it's not amazing, but it's okay until the end, I think.
Yeah, the next one is my personal favorite.
Well, I did want to say, there was I haven't read it, and can't really say how much it applies, but September of that same year, 1965, Brian Aldiss published a story called The The Saliva Tree in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, and that won the 1965 Nebula Award for Best Novella. And it's not a direct adaptation, but it does contain a ton of similar elements. Has an object coming down from space to Earth, making plants and animals grow but be unpalatable. I really wish I could have read that so I could say how much it related or not, but I didn't have time to. Following that, a decade later, which seems like a crazy short amount of time for how much better it is, but in 1976 we had Stephen King's short story Weeds, which was adapted into a short in the 1982 Creepshow anthology film, which while Weeds I don't think at any point specifically states it's a Color Out of Space adaptation, I think the similarities are too stark to deny. It's a farmer out in the middle of nowhere, a meteorite comes down and lands, and then everything around it suddenly starts getting changed, but instead of it sucking the life out of everything around it, it's just causing alien plant growth to cover everything.
Well, and I think when they added it to the Creepshow film, I think when they played with the name of that segment of the film, because they changed it from Weeds to The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill, I think that was an attempt to kind of reference the Lovecraftian elements, because the screenplay, the film was written by Stephen King and directed by George Romero, so Stephen King is an admitted H.P. Lovecraft fan, and he's taken a lot of inspiration from him. His book, The Tommyknockers, he claims that one was heavily inspired by The Color Out of Space, which in that one, a woman is digging in her property and she finds this metallic object and it resonates with her, for lack of a better term, and she has a friend from the old days who is an alcoholic writer, Stephen King drinking game you just lost, and he has a metal plate in his head, so the ship doesn't affect him like it does everyone else, and the more of this alien object she uncovers, the more it infects the surrounding town. And towards the end of the book and the film, you find out that the ship was carrying this race of aliens that are basically psychic vampires, and they are siphoning the life force from the people in the area.
Yeah, it's very similar, and if you just, I suppose most people really focus on the Color Out of Space and the weird things it's doing to the plants and animals, but if you took another angle and said, let's do the same story, but instead of the thing being intangible, let's just make it an alien spaceship, then that's pretty much gives you Tommyknockers. But I haven't read the story, unfortunately. Stephen King remains a point that I really need to delve into more, but I did see the TV movie.
It's amazing. I love it. I love that miniseries.
Yeah, it's pretty good, yeah. And I suppose as long as we're in the 80s, there was actually a 1984 novel by Michael Shea called The Color Out of Time, and it's a story set 50 years after the original story. In it, they refer to the Color Out of Space as the enemy, but basically the dam has been built and the thing's been festering under there for all these years, and it's finally gained enough strength that's beginning to seep out of the lake and into the area. And as a way of smoothing out any plot inconsistencies, The Color Out of Space by H.P. Lovecraft is a published book in this story, but in this story, Lovecraft had just heard an anecdote from somebody that was there for the actual events.
Oh.
So basically, in this story's context, the unnamed surveyor that Ami told the story to was Lovecraft.
That is the plot to so many H.P. Lovecraft movies. And an episode of Supernatural. And an episode of The Real Ghostbusters.
Yeah, which I haven't read this either, but I'm curious too. I haven't bought it yet, but I've been thinking about it.
Do it.
Although I have heard that it doesn't really live up. It's not very Lovecraftian, for example. I've skimmed through a bunch of different reviews, and a common theme seemed to be people not liking that the enemy seemed too directly antagonistic, like it just enjoyed messing with people and snickering at them and such. But that gets us to the late 80s, where we finally have The Curse in 1987. I'm glad you like this one so much, because I did not.
Oh God, I love this movie. It's like right up,
I like aspects of it.
It's like right up there with the video Dead for me.
Another one I have the same opinion on. So this movie, it's directed like a comedy.
It's an amazing prequel to Twin Peaks.
Because you're saying that because all the characters are so exaggerated caricatures.
Yes, it is very Lynchian.
Yeah, I mean, there's points when I'm watching Twin Peaks where it starts to feel like a Nickelodeon sitcom to me, and that's what this feels like to me. I guess it's similar to Dolls in a way too, which came out that same year, where everyone is cartoonishly exaggerated, and Twin Peaks only came out a few years later, so maybe that was just a late 80s vibe. Half of the characters talk in ridiculously thick accents, and it's got Charlie Day.
Will Wheaton.
It does have Will Wheaton as a teen.
Oh, you gotta say Will Wheaton first.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, he's the family in this, instead of being a normal farm family. It's the father and his son, who's the sort of... He's the, like, larger, stronger kind of bully brother. And then the mother is marrying into this family in a Brady Bunch type situation, and she's bringing her son and daughter, who are Will Wheaton and the little girl who is played by Will Wheaton's actual sister.
Yes, Amy Wheaton.
Mm-hmm.
Oh god, the brother in this is so horrible. He's like Buzz from Home Alone. He's just like turned up to 11.
Yeah, very similar, very similar. That's another very common trope of that period, was the slightly larger, abrasive, bullying older brother. And if it's a stepbrother, even better.
Something I found a nice little coincidence is that the stepfather in this is played by Claude Akins, who was in 2 episodes of Twilight Zone. One of them being The Monsters Who Do on Maple Street, which is about basically these aliens show up and they cause all this hysteria, but all of the damage and all of the horror that happens in the episode is a result of the hysteria. Like, nothing actually does anything in the episode, well, the majority of the episode / story, because this one was actually written by Rod Serling. Nothing happens other than a result of the hysteria these people create for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like the kind of commentary he himself liked.
The other episode he's in is The Little People.
Oh, I love that one.
Mm-hmm. And I just thought it was a nice little coincidence that the 2 episodes he'd been in were, both kind of dealt with alien.
Yeah.
Oh, we also have John Snyder, too, who's famous for The Dukes of Hazzard and Smallville.
Playing who?
He's Carl Willis in The Curse.
Okay. I suppose in this instance, the unnamed surveyor, because he's from the Tennessee Valley Authority.
Yes.
I'm surprised you knew he did that. I just thought of him as Superman's dad from Smallville.
Yeah, I've never been a big Dukes of Hazzard fan, but I knew that was something that he had been in and was famous for. This movie, though, it has everything. They basically said, oh, we have the framework here to make a movie. Let's throw in everything and the kitchen sink. You've got this weird, like, baby oil fetish seduction scene.
That's why it's a bad movie to me.
Yes. You've got the repressed mother sneaking off to have hillbilly sex
to
with the
get it on with the farmhand, yeah. You've got the evil landlord trying to get them to sell.
Yes. Vegetables filled with mealworms that are supposed to be maggots. And these vegetables, too, a nice mutation of the vegetables in this film is that they grow serrated in the middle so that you get a perfectly flush cut when you cut them in half. I just love Claude Akins in this movie because he overacts so much. And poor Will Wheaton, I mean, he just gets the shit beat out of him in this movie every time he turns around.
I actually can't recall if they're the Gardner family in this. I only really remember their first names.
No. They're not. They're the Crane family.
No? Oh, you're right. The Crane family. Yes, you're right. Yeah, it is still Nathan. Or not, instead of Nahum, they made him Nathan. They renamed Nahum to Nathan in so many adaptations that I almost forgot that wasn't the norm.
And I feel like he is almost willfully ignorant in this movie, because right off the bat...
Oh, he's my favorite character.
Yes, because like all this stuff keeps happening, and he's like, oh, sometimes the horse gets spooked. Well, then why does everyone else here think it's weird that all this stuff is happening? And he's so crazy. The water, no one wants to, Will Wheaton doesn't want to drink the water, and he's like, you'll starve to death, and you'll thirst to death, or you'll drink this water.
So the father of the family, he's normally seen as a very, like, spooky, like, oppressive character, because he's like, I'm running this family, you're doing what I'm saying, or else you're getting the belt. And he's that way to his kids and to his wife. But then it has like a point where a scientist is trying to explain to them, yeah, there's something is seeping out of the meteor, and then the older brother Cyrus is like, meteor shit. And then everyone like stops and stares at him, and the dad like just stops, stares at him for about 10 seconds. and then the dad gets it, and the dad starts laughing. It's really funny.
And this movie has a lot of nostalgia for me too, because for a good decade, we had only seen the ass end of this movie with Jello Mom and Exploding House, and for years we had no idea what this movie actually was. But then when I watched it again and saw Jello Mom, it all made sense.
Yeah, I've looked at a lot of people reviewing this movie online, and they all say bad things about it, and I didn't like it much either. But there is something about it that I can't describe, like a color out of space. But everybody that's ever seen it remembers it.
There's nothing I don't like about this movie. It is just the best of the worst. I mean, the scene when Nathan is out picking vegetables, and then he cuts into one of them, and he's like, "Oh, damn it!" So then he just going through the bucket, and he's just sitting there, cutting these pre-sliced vegetables in half, going, "Oh, it's all of them." He's so unintentionally hammy, and I love it. And he's super overzealous and super religious.
Yeah, there's a very strong religious theme put in this movie, which we'll see in some of the other adaptations too. I guess that's kind of similar to what we were saying about Die Monster Die, where they made it feel like a Satanist cult, although they did specifically say of the outer ones, but I feel like they probably put that there just because at that point in time, having it be a satanic cult was a little too much, but all the trappings leaned more that way than to anything eldritch.
And it's even got super delightful plot holes. Like at one point he blames all of this on his wife's sin, but it's never addressed in the film, what the hell he's talking about. We know she's done stuff, but there's never a point.
Well, he knows. Because when the meteor comes down, he wakes up and she's not there in bed beside him, and then when he goes outside to check on the meteor, her and the farmhand both come running out together from the farmhand's shack, and he kind of stops and glares at her.
Yeah, but he's the kind of, he knows, but at the same time, he doesn't strike me as an incredibly subtle guy. He strikes me as the kind of guy that if he really thought something was going on like that, he would have shotgunned his wife and the farmhand.
Yeah, the way that he just decides to not bring it up, and he just, in most scenes past that point, he just, in any time they're having a family meal, he's just silently glaring at her, but he won't bring it up.
I especially enjoy all the scenes of Will Wheaton running off to town to go steal food. And
oh yeah, because he doesn't want to eat anything off the farm or drink the farm water, and the dad eventually finds out, and he's mad that he's been drinking the neighbor's hose pipe.
How dare you not eat these snot tomatoes?
Yeah, and the damn water authority thing, that was a pretty minor thing. It was just like the trappings, or the book endings of the original Lovecraft story, and ignored in Die Monster Die. But in this, they make it be Charlie Davidson, who he's not the mayor, he's just the town council president, I think, and he's trying to get them to sell the farm so that they can build a dam.
But I love him too. He reminds me a lot of the guy that played Ed in the Return of the Living Dead movies. So the whole time I was watching this movie, initially I was having to take double takes and make sure it wasn't the same actor, because he did a very good job of cosplaying him in this film. And they did the same thing like they did in Die Monster Die. The mom basically turns into a deadite, which has no grounding in the story, but it seems to be the go-to in adaptations. Like, turn her into some kind of monster.
They lock her in the cellar at first, but then they later move her to the attic.
Which was very Evil Dead-ish.
Mm-hmm.
That whole time she's locked in the cellar, and then the guy goes down there with the matches, and he's like lighting them, trying to look around. That very much reminded me of Evil Dead.
Oh yeah, it has that nice scene where he walks in there and he lights a match, and there's nothing behind him, and it goes out. Then he lights a match, and she's behind him, and it goes out. Then he lights a match, and she's not behind him again. But yeah, I feel like we're jumping all over this movie. I guess we don't need to go too in depth, but there's so many plots going on in this movie.
They go nowhere.
It's got the landlord trying to get them to sell the dam. It's got the whole conflict with the family, and the brother's trying to get him and the sister to leave together, but they got to prep more for it. And then it's also got, aside from the guy from the water authority, it has like the town scientist that they bring to look at it. And
the doctor.
The town council president keeps trying to get him to analyze the meteor, and he keeps being like, I have no idea what I'm doing. This is not my field of specialty. I'm like testing stuff with water kits, but I don't know what I'm doing. And then it has like scenes of him with his mistress, and she's smearing the oil and trying to seduce him into continuing to not report the meteor to the authorities, because the town council president's worried that the meteor will delay the building of the dam in the town.
There's just not a dull moment here. There's always something to keep you vested in the film. You probably just weren't drunk enough when you watched it.
Possible.
Oh, the exploding cows. I have to mention the exploding cows.
Yeah, I feel like... So the meteor in this, instead of having a color, there's none of that. It's just green goo comes out of the slime, and it has this nice scene with like the 80s music of the slime seeping out into the crops. Most of it is just stuff turning gross. Like you said, it has the mealworms and the apples. It has cows with big sores on them, and then they burst into the what's supposed to be the maggot piles. And a lot more focus on animals in this one. It has like the chickens try to peck the little girl to death. The horses attack the older brother Cyrus, and he's trying to squeeze through the barbed wire fence, and Will Wheaton snaps the barbed wire on his ass, so the mom has to stitch his ass afterwards, but ends up just drawing pentagrams on his ass with blood because she's too far gone at that point.
Yeah.
I almost feel like if they'd gone harder into the gross stuff, I think that would have been good for this movie. Or even this movie as it is would almost be a really good movie.
With more structure?
No, I was going to say...
Yeah, let's be honest, though.
I was going to say this movie could almost be a good horror movie for younger people.
Less plots?
But it has too much sexual stuff for that.
Yeah, it could work kind of like Disney's Watcher in the Woods.
Yeah, so either cut the scenes of the seductress and the sex and make it be a kids horror movie, or up the grossness. One of the two probably could have saved it. It does kind of like the original story. It does kind of keep the thing where it almost just seems like a natural event, and it's just everyone behaving dumb, making it be a bad situation until the end of the movie. Suddenly at the end of the movie, instead of it just being stuff getting mutated by the meteor, suddenly like the whole house starts contorting and warping and bending and condensing in on itself, and that comes out of nowhere and doesn't really get explained.
It really should have took a page out of Poltergeist Notebook. If you're going to do something like that to a house, just do the implode and have a budget for it. I'm pretty sure it was a miniature.
Yeah,
but,
almost certainly.
It is what it is. It's a fitting end to a great film.
Getting a little into the making of more, I will say the music's pretty interesting. It's like a blend of 80s synth and Western movie guitar twang that I don't normally hear. And that made the soundtrack pretty interesting for most of it, although it does have some moments where it doesn't really work that well. Like near the climax has a point where Cyrus, the bully older brother's been contaminated and he's attacking Will Wheaton, and it has like, imagine like the Jason theme, like when he's chasing people through the woods, except instead of like a low note on a stringed instrument, it's a banjo. And it makes it just feel kind of silly.
I love the soundtrack. I believe I described it to you as Hollywood Western meets 70s Goblin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty accurate, actually. I should say real quick, so this movie, it was sort of like a dual production where they filmed it in two places. All of the outdoor shots were done in Tennessee, where the movie itself says it's set, but all the indoor stuff was filmed in Rome. And they had like two teams, and strangely all of the Italian people that worked on this in the credits are swapped over to Americanized names. I'm not sure why. But Lucio Fulci even actually worked on this. He is credited as associate producer Louis Fulci, although it seems like he probably didn't do a whole lot on this. He was probably just in charge of like that B team. The main producer for the film in an interview said that Louis Fulci said that Lucio Fulci was just in charge of the B team. I don't know if that means the team in Rome or if the two teams moved back and forth or what, but...
Or if you were Lucio Fulci, wouldn't you want to change your name before attaching it to this project?
Fair enough. And there's also an interview with Will Wheaton where he said that he didn't want to do this movie, but his parents made him because it was a free trip to Rome. I get some Exorcist vibes from this too, both from the gross out stuff and any of the people, once they're mutated, they're constantly going to have stuff coming out of their mouth. It even has like a scene with the mother tied up in bed. It has the same framing as a shot from Exorcist while the father is reading the Book of Revelations to her.
Real subtle.
I don't know, maybe more subtle note, I don't know. It has a scene where the TV is mentioning the Challenger space shuttle disaster, and I thought that was kind of nice for, I don't know, just giving it more of that, a tie back to space with the meteor. I guess the one last thing I might want to say about it is the movie has this odd cold open where it's the person from the Tennessee Valley Authority in a car, and he's like just screaming, "It's in the water! Don't drink the water!" as they take him through town. It has a bunch of shots of people drinking water, and I don't know why that... I feel like that scene would be good at the end of the movie to show, oh no, it's going to get out and seep to other places, but putting it at the beginning, just, I don't know. I don't know why it's there. But after that, we managed to go through the 90s without any color out of space adaptations that I'm aware of.
Well, we got 2 sequels to The Curse.
Oh, that's... well,
Thankfully, they have nothing to do with it.
yeah, The Curse is one of those franchises, like kind of like Troll, where they just... the first one did good enough that they just kept taking independent horror movies and rebranding them as The Curse. Like, I think Part 2 is about mutant snakes, and I don't know what Part 3 is about, but then Part 4 is about... and then Curse 4 was actually just a rebranded Catacombs, which was made by... David Schmoller, who was director for Puppet Master 1. And I believe he said that was his favorite movie he'd done, but he was sad because he thought people would never see it because it had been rebranded into Curse 4, which I haven't seen it, but it's high up on my list of things to get to.
Yeah, it pretty much turned into an anthology franchise.
But we did finally, in 2008, we finally got Color from the Dark,
Yeah.
which... I watched it on Amazon Prime. It's still available there. And that's an Italian movie directed by Ivan Zuccon, who more recently did Herbert West Reanimator film in 2017. He also did The Shunned House in 2003. And before that, he did The Darkness Beyond and Unknown Beyond. Yeah, so this is an Italian movie set during World War II. Has a much more artistic flavor than the other adaptations. And I only saw this one in the past week, but I think I probably prefer this to Die Monster Die or to The Curse. Although it's probably not as readily, probably not as good as of a party film as The Curse. Where you can just like,
I'll give it that.
There's stuff to talk about in every single shot. So this movie, so it is set in Italy and in World War II, so it's already a pretty heavy departure from the first one. I'd say this one is probably almost as removed as Die Monster Die is. This one doesn't even have a meteor in it, as far as I'm aware of. It just has the well. And basically there's a family, and there's a man and his wife, and then his wife's younger sister, Alice, who's mute, and she seems to get most of the focus of the movie because the movie opens with her having a nightmare and has blood get splattered all over. She's constantly walking around holding a doll in front of her so that the doll can check if a place is safe before she goes there. She's scared of the stairwell in their house, and in the opening she goes out to the well and has the doll peer into it to see if it's safe, but then when the doll says it's safe and she goes to check, she accidentally knocks the doll into the well.
Yeah, I didn't really dig the doll.
And basically what it turns out is there's just something evil in the well. There's a point where I think they send Alice out to get water from the well, and she accidentally drops the bucket in it. I think I was saying the father. I guess they should just say the husband, because he doesn't have children in this. But the husband, he is poking down at the bottom of the well trying to fish the bucket out and knocks out the bottom of it, and that somehow lets the evil out. And it's odd, as soon as it happens, he pokes it and it gives, he like reacts and is like, "Oh, it stinks so bad." And then he immediately after draws up a bucket of water and tastes it and goes, nice and fresh.
If something smelled that bad, no matter how good it tasted, I don't think I would be able to drink it.
And like The Curse, this one kind of keeps a religious aspect going throughout it, because after they unleash whatever's in the well, just as before, crops start growing super big, and they eat them, and although in this they don't just straight out think they're disgusting, in this they actually just say that they taste weird. But instead of it being just the plants that seem better at first, they lean into that angle more in this, and a lot of things get better. The husband of the family, he had a bad leg, and his leg gets better, and Alice was a mute, and she starts talking, so it seems like everything's just going great for them, but then it starts going downhill in a much worse way, and it feels like a much more demonic way.
Yeah, they shoehorn a lot of Christianity into this film.
Or Catholicism.
It's the most direct of the adaptations, I think, to drive in with a hammer the occult aspect.
Yeah, because they have a cross on the wall and it keeps getting knocked down, and they have a preacher that comes and he tries to perform an exorcism on the mother of the family once she gets far gone, as she always does in these adaptations. On that note, I think another one of the things is, I think like it implies there's a common theme in these about the sexual relationship between the husband and wife seeming to have died. I don't remember that being in the original Lovecraft story, but the curse had it, where the wife wanted to sleep with the husband, but he wouldn't because he was like, it's not proper. The man needs to make the advance. So she sleeps with the farmhand, and then the meteor falls. And then in this, it has like their relationship's dried up, but once they release the thing from the well, she starts wanting to have sex with him again. Although that very quickly, just like the plants turning bad and everything else, that turns bad, where she's almost being a nymphomaniac towards him. And this movie also, it's really heavy on the dream scenes. It opens with that one with like Alicia in bed with blood getting all over and so on, but then everybody in this movie like constantly has dream scenes, and it's so common that almost like half the movie is dream scenes. And pretty much any time any scene is happening, if it starts to reach a point where it seems like things are getting a little too intense, then you know it's a dream. The movie also, they use a lot of CG in this, and I feel like they really shouldn't have. Most of it's even just used for really plain shots. Like, there's a lot of shots of the outside of the house where the sky is very clearly CG. There's shots of food with flies on them, and the flies are very clearly CG on the food. There's like a cross melting, and the cross melting will be CG, and I feel like all those are things where they could have very easily done it practically.
Yeah, how hard is it to do flies? You literally just... if you have food, flies will go to it.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a big issue if it weren't for how bad the CG looks. That outside of that, though, I do think actually there's some decent cinematography in this. I actually really like the color balance in it a lot. It's like specific colors, reds, greens, seem to like pop a lot. But then a lot of any like more neutral color, like the browns and grays, are like extra desaturated, and I kind of like the way that looks in this.
There are some really good visuals in this film, I will give it that, especially coming from kind of like the budget genre.
Mm-hmm.
Bad CG aside.
Yeah. Half the time when they look in the well, the water in its CG, I'm just like, oh, why? Speaking of colors, the color out of space itself in this, even though it's not from space in this movie, they actually represent it. You know, it's sentient in this, which it was not in Die Monster Die or The Curse. And in this, they just sort of represent it as a sort of light that shimmers across surfaces with an electrical crackle. But it seems, instead of it just being more of an incomprehensible space thing, it does seem presented a lot like a demon, with how much aversion it seems to have to crosses and how it possesses people, and has that whole attempted exorcism scene. Although somebody in this does finally have like a more direct Lovecraft quote. There's somebody says it gets inside you, it sucks the life out. On subtitles, at least.
Yeah, you can always trust those amazing subtitles.
Yeah, there's heavy focus on the well and the water in this. It's funny, I think the water wasn't too heavily focused on in the original Lovecraft. The well being where the thing was living was sort of a late reveal, but many of these adaptations really focus on the water.
I feel like this one, too, seems to be the one that is the most like a modern ghost horror movie.
Yeah, I agree.
It plays out very much like that. It has a lot of the tropes of what you think of when you think of the aughts to now when it comes to spooky movies.
Mm-hmm. Although this one does also, it has like, especially like those like shots where somebody suddenly gets a CG monster face and screams at the camera, yeah.
The creepy doll.
Yeah, I do think this is the only adaptation that has the color desaturating everything around it. As you know, I talked about like that color balance and how vibrant things are, and I think they did that on purpose, because as the movie goes on, that slowly gets turned down, and everything gets turned more and more white as the movie goes on, until near the end they've just like scattered ash on all the sets, and everyone has like white makeup on their faces. And there's this one really nice scene I liked in one of the dream sequences where the wife cuts her cheek open with a razor and then starts peeling her cheek back, and that scene actually looks really good. I think it's practical. Well, no, it can't be practical. It's probably a mix. But as she like peels her cheek back, and you see like, you know, the red muscle underneath, and then once she pulls her skin back more, there's like an eyeball in her cheek, and then she wakes up. I like that scene pretty good. Sadly, no rapidly decomposing people like you got. So Die Monster Die had the wife rapidly decompose on the floor. The Curse had the mom rapidly decompose near the end in the attic. That does not happen in this one, but it does have woman that out in the woods that Alice goes and visits every day that dies super early, and you get to see her gradually decompose, I guess. And the movie also has this odd thing where it has like title cards announcing each day, like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and I'm not really sure why it has that, because every single day has a nighttime scene and a daytime scene, so you know that's happening, unless they just thought it was really important to point out that it took place over 1 week. So yeah, this one probably is as far removed as Die Monster Die, like I said, but I think it's pretty good. Has some really good visuals, especially near the end with the walls melting. Similar to all of them, though, it just has kind of a weak ending. It's like this movie just stops. It's like the family gets going bad, then more people show up, and then they die, and then more people show up, and then they die, and then at the end it's just like one person's maybe left, and somebody else shows up, and then it ends.
Yeah, it's just like it's a rush for the body count towards the end.
Yeah, and I guess similar to the ghost movie thing you said, the curse has pretty standard gross mutation until the end when the house collapses for no reason. Die Monster Die is just meteor radiation. The original Color Out of Space is just meteor radiation until the very end when the stuff in the well shoots up out of the well. This one just has like crazy stuff happening all the time for no reason. People die and come back from the dead. There's constant dream sequences. People getting possessed. Characters constantly showing up all throughout the movie.
There's definitely no lack of new characters to become vested in for 30 seconds.
Still entertaining, though.
I agree. I like it more than Die Monster Die.
Yeah, I'd probably say I do as well.
But less than the curse. It's going to be hard to beat the curse. I'll just put that out there right now.
Alright, but I guess that covers everything I wanted to say about that one. I guess we can move on to just 2 years later. We had the German film, Die Farbe, which is The Color in German. And this one is maybe even more artsy than the last one.
Yes, but they make some really amazing choices in this film.
Yeah, I like this one a lot. This was directed by Huan Vu, who also wrote the screenplay. And it seems like the only other major thing he did was a Warhammer 40k fan film, although he is currently working on a new film, The Dreamlands, based on Lovecraft's Dream Cycle series of stories. There's a trailer for that you can find online on his YouTube channel. And this film solves the problem of how to depict the color out of space by having the color be the only thing in the movie that's in color.
Yes, and I love that decision. It is, in my opinion, out of all of the adaptations I've seen, it's one of the best choices to represent the color.
I feel like there's this strange thing where each movie has to take something from the last one. So like Die Monster Die was all like about them saying that what was happening was a curse. And then the next movie is the curse, even though there's no curse in that movie.
And then in this one, you've got the whole World War II aspect.
Yeah, exactly. World War II thing came back.
And this time, he's Gartner rather than Gardner.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, though he is still Nahum. And I think they kept Marwyn as one of the sons, but the rest of the children are Samuel, Thaddeus, and Armin now. But this is a person named Jonathan, whose father, who was a medic during World War II, went missing, and he's searching for his father. It's kind of funny. I remember him. He's going to try to go to some road, and they can't let him down the road because they're building a dam. And I remember they laugh that he's a dumb American, despite his facial features and accent and dress all being resoundingly British. But this movie is also the only adaptation that keeps from the original story of most of it being a flashback. He ends up finding a person that, like Ami, worked at the farm. This was just a place that the World War II soldiers happened to wander past. And he tells him the story about how a meteor crashed, tells him about Ergotner. And this is also probably the only one that keeps the whole segment from the original Lovecraft story about them taking the meteor to the lab. I was surprised how long that section was of just the scientists messing with the meteor. Has them describing it soft like plastic, has them talking about the stone shrinking and taking it to the lab and going back for more. It's like beat for beat following the Lovecraft story for all of that.
Well, and I really like that little touch they do there too, because that is not prevalent, but it is mentioned in the story that the meteor shrinks. It just doesn't cool. It never cools, but it does shrink.
Well, it does get mentioned in several of the adaptations, but it's usually just like a really quick throwaway line that you won't really notice unless you're paying attention. But in this, it's very explicitly make sure you're aware of that. They also have jumbo pears instead of tomatoes for a change, and in this, they're not awful. They just don't really seem to like them. I think they just say they have a strange taste.
I think tomatoes are just the easiest to use in these situations because, they're largely hollow and they're plentiful. So it's easy to stuff in them.
But yeah, so this one kind of very closely follows the original. It does have, I remember there's a scene of the brothers trying to play a game to decide which one of them has to go get water from the well and which one has to wash the mom once she's gotten to the point where she's started to be affected by the meteor. And there's no colors until about 52 minutes into this, when it starts showing fireflies that have a sort of pink or magenta glow to them. And around the same time, the narrator says something like, they never ate the fruit, but it became clear to me that there must be something in the water.
The one thing that this movie added that was absent from the others, it works with a lot of hallucinations, and it gets kind of an art house vibe from the way it presents those. This film is definitely the most artistic of all the films, and that's not to discredit the aesthetic of the other films. This one feels a lot like an art house film. The way everything is presented and encapsulated, and then once they get to the farm and he starts learning about what happened to the family, everything has almost a surreal aspect to it. It had a very heavy focus on the hallucinations, and I think that had a lot to do with them trying to put a lot of emphasis on the mental state of the characters as things continued to progress. It went much more in depth to the whole aspect of slowly eroding the sanity away.
Mm-hmm.
And it does a very good job of showing the breakdown of this family individually. As far as Lovecraft adaptations go, this is probably one of the more faithful, aside from the framework changes they do, such as World War II and Going to Look for His Father.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of all of them, all the Color Out of Space adaptations at least, this is definitely the most faithful to the original story.
Okay, for example, there's a scene where there's an eye from behind like a bush. There's a lot of focus on this eye like it's something alien or mysterious, but the camera eventually, pulls out of the shot and it's just a frog. But it did a good job of showing the ominous oppression that was weighing on the family.
Also, like I said earlier, in the original story, it has that scene where the outsiders go to check in on the mom, and it doesn't describe what they found, it just says that they buried what they found. And this one kind of seems like it's going to do the same thing, where it has somebody opens the door to upstairs and covers their mouth, and then they see what's inside, and it just has like a split-second distorted shot of it, and then they run back out into the hall coughing. I liked that pretty good. But then he actually goes back into the room and interacts with her. I'm like, oh, well, you wasted it now. But although I do kind of enjoy when he just gets a broom and starts poking her, because he's not sure if she's alive or not.
A lot of times that works really well in a movie, but you have to stick with it, because I find it to be true, nothing's ever going to be as grotesque or as scary as what you can create for yourself in your own imagination.
Yeah, I thought that scene started really good, but then then it ends with some really bad CG of her slobbering pink as she does a silent zombie yell, and then I didn't like that.
The CG, the black and white works well for a lot of stuff in this film. Like the wintry aspect of the film, the black and white does a really good job of creating an atmosphere, but then any kind of scene with CG in black and white that wasn't from the last 3 years, it's really hard to make it look convincing.
Yeah, they also have some kind of Color from the Dark. They have some really unnecessary CG where they drop a rock to the bottom of a well, and they do that part in CG for some reason. And this is also the only one that keeps the original sort of ending where it has all the pink or magenta balls flying off to space at the end. And he does eventually find his dad, and the dad seems comatose, but then his eyes finally start to move. But just as the tree branches start to sway, which I don't think we mentioned, but in the original book, it has a thing about one of the sons claiming that the tree branches move when there's no wind. And it's almost like a throwaway line in the book, I guess. But all adaptations really love to hone in on that aspect. I assume that's why it had the vines grabbing the girl and Die Monster Die. But
well, thanks to Evil Dead, people quit looking at forest foliage the same way. And I mean, really think about it. When you're in a forest, when you're surrounded by trees, you never think about it. It's never an aspect in the back of your mind going, oh, I'm surrounded by a lot of trees.
They got me surrounded.
It's easy to play with in a film like this. It's something that's abundant. There's not to discredit any of the work that goes into a film, but it's not the most taxing practical effect to create. I don't understand why someone would try to use CG for a tree attacking somebody. And there's a lot of jumping around in this movie too, though. That's probably the biggest attraction, I could say. Like when you were talking about the flies.
Oh, that was in Color from the Dark.
Yeah, but there's a scene with the fly in this with the it's on a bottle and it zips away and then it just jumps to a scene of a guy killing himself. I mean, and we don't really get anything after that. There's no payoff to that.
Yeah, it's a lot of just trying to create a mood, I think, in this one.
Well, that's what I was talking about with the art house
Yeah.
aspect. This movie seems to be very focused on just creating a very specific aesthetic and atmosphere. One of the choices I really liked is it being a bilingual film. You don't see that very often, and I don't know why. It just appealed to me in this movie. I love that it's a German film, but there's plenty of English dialogue in it, and you just get subtitles, when it jumps to German. But still, it was something you see infrequently enough that it was really nice to see it when it happened.
Yeah, because the protagonist is English speaker, so all the early scenes in the movie are all in English till he goes to Germany, and then he's fumbling with German when speaking to people there, and then when you get the World War II scenes, they pretty regularly alternate, because it's American soldiers, but they're frequently having to speak German to speak with the locals. But yeah, I wasn't really planning on trying to do like a ranking of any of these, but this one's definitely high up on my list of these.
Yeah, I agree. Die Monster Die, and it's a little unfair because it's an older movie and a lot of the effects and a lot of that kind of stuff doesn't hold up as well, but it's probably my least favorite, and this one probably sits right behind The Curse, and The Color from the Dark is probably right above Die Monster Die. The next film is probably going to be the most divisive between me and you.
Yeah, I think so. Honestly, they all rank almost equal to me. The difference is very subtle. There's a lot of stuff I like and dislike in all of them. Until you get to the 2019 one, and that's probably my favorite of them, but...
I have issues with this film.
Yeah, I'll be curious to hear them, but yeah, this was made by Richard Stanley, who hadn't directed a featured film since working on the 1996...
Island of Dr. Moreau.
Yeah, which I saw. There's an interview with him that you can listen to that I found on a Strange Aeons podcast. They had a October 2019 interview with him that's pretty good, and I'm not gonna recite too much from that, but he does say some stuff like about how good it was working with Nicolas Cage for this, and about how when he was working on Island of Dr. Moreau, they would lost weeks of time just because actors were not willing to shoot on days he wanted to shoot and refusing to come out of their trailers, and Nick Cage was there every single morning. As
an aside, there's a really good documentary about the filming of Dr. Moreau because it was a very...
troubled production.
Yes, and enough so that there is a documentary literally about what the hell happened to that movie. I enjoy The Island of Dr. Moreau. It's not my favorite. There's a lot of parts in that film that are hard to get through, but it survived better than Battlefield Earth did, thank God. Lost Soul is the name of the documentary. It's called Lost Soul, The Doomed Journey of Richard Stanley's Island of Dr. Moreau.
Yeah. Thinking on it now, going back, it's kind of ironic. Richard Stanley did that, and then Color Space and The Island of Dr. Moreau was written by H.G. Wells, and H.G. Wells and Lovecraft both had stories and amazing stories.
The thing I was most excited about this film is that it was kicking off a series of films based on H.P. Lovecraft works. That was something I was super happy to hear because I'm still lamenting the fact that Guillermo del Toro's At the Mountains of Madness, the film, kind of fell through because that would have been amazing. I don't know if you've actually ever read that story, but like a lot of Lovecraft stuff, it can get very sluggish to watch in some points, but it is a great story. It has a very epic feel to it. It even has almost this 1920s adventure serial feel to it in some parts, which is really weird for a Lovecraft story. But I was very, very excited to, learn that this was going to be the first film out of many. Well, 3. I'm not sure if many is a proper adjective to use there.
Yeah, well, I guess, so apparently Richard Stanley, he did a short called Mother of Toads for the Theatre Bazaar, which was a 2011 anthology horror film inspired by the Grand Guignol. Tom Savini actually did a segment for that also. But apparently he, after doing that, it was pretty Lovecraftian, and afterwards people were told him that they thought he should do a full Lovecraft movie, and so he did the script for Color Out of Space, but then the people that had told him to do it had gone under since then, so he was just stuck sitting on that script and passing it around for a while, and eventually somehow someone got it to Nicolas Cage. He said in his interview that he just got a phone call from Nicolas Cage in a bar, like going on a rant about the pink mantis. And what he said was just like part of like they had like a design doc where they were like describing stuff in the movie, and they were showing like infrared stuff, and it had like a shot of an infrared mantis, and apparently Nicolas Cage liked that a lot, so that's why Richard Saint was like, oh geez, I guess I actually have to put a mantis in the movie now. So that's why it has that bug, if you were wondering. But there's a lot of really cool stuff in this. So Farbe had black and white, and the only color in it was the color out of space, but they still had to pick a color for it. And they picked that sort of pink magenta color.
Oh, the magenta, yes.
And that's what they went with in this too.
I was reading up on the magenta because apparently the reason they chose to go with magenta is because it's very specific circumstances are required for our eyes to see magenta. Yeah, well,
magenta's not on the rainbow because magenta's not a real color. It's a color your brain makes up.
Yeah.
Because, you have the red, green, and blue cones. And if your like red and green cones are both firing, then your brain knows, okay, there's a color in between these, and so it lets you know you're seeing orange. And if your green and blue cones are firing, it knows, okay, there's something in between these, so it gives you like a teal color. But if only your red cones and only your blue cones are firing, in between those is green, but your green cones aren't firing, so it knows you're not seeing that, you're just seeing nothing but the far ends, something towards the outer edges, infrared and ultraviolet, where you start moving out of the visible spectrum. So if your brain sees only those ends and not the middle, then your brain makes up magenta. That's why you can see magenta, but you don't see magenta much in nature, and why there's no magenta on the rainbow, and that's why they used magenta for the color out of space. They did stuff with that with the audio too.
Oh, now that is one thing I love about this movie. The audio in this film is, for the most part, amazing. It makes me feel very reminiscent of when Marilyn Manson scored the Resident Evil films. He used a lot of weird frequencies in order to elicit a psychological reaction from people, and I feel like maybe some of that was going on with this film.
Yeah, they did. Similar to how with the color, they tried to have a lot of like red and violet varying around magenta, because infrared and ultraviolet is where you move out of the visible spectrum. The composer Colin Stetson, he kind of did the same thing with the audio, where you'll hear the audio constantly like fading in and out, and it's still doing stuff, but he just has it moving in and out of the range that's perceivable by humans. So it's like hitting like highs and lows that you just can't hear in the soundtrack. But yeah, I suppose I should go ahead and say, so this one does have the Gardner family. It's Nathan Gardner. Although they did, instead of 3 sons, this one does trim it down to 2 sons and a daughter this time.
Yes. Can we talk about the daughter for a minute?
Sure.
Because after the short narration we're given at the beginning of this movie, I can't be the only person that feels like somebody accidentally threw a DVD of Labyrinth on. That whole scene at the beginning...
Maybe that's why it appealed to me.
Pretty close.
But yeah, after it, you have some opening and narration from the surveyor, and then it cuts to the daughter out sitting by the lake doing a Wiccan ritual.
It's not fair.
And I think I think Richard Stanley said that scene was originally, the movie was going to be set more back in time, but then they eventually decided to go ahead and make it be modern, and that scene was partially like a vestigial part from that. But the original Lovecraft story does mention witches like at one point, like I think the surveyor, when everyone's like all superstitious about the blasted heath, he says that it's because that it's in an area where like witchcraft stuff is still fresh on their minds from decades past, and I assume that's why it got put in there. But
okay, how fucking old is the daughter supposed to be in this movie? The actress who played her, I think, was 22 at the time this movie was made, but the movie presents her like she's like college age. She's close to being an adult, but she acts like she's 12 the entire film. You have this adult who is employed, who based on all of the things he does in the movie, is at least a college graduate, and he is following after this girl like a lovesick puppy. So is she 13? Is she 16? Does she just need to get a job and move her ass out of the house?
I mean, I think that's what she wants to do, but...
There's just so many weird things in this movie. Like, these parents are super strict in so many aspects. Like, they get mad because she rides her horse. She lives on a fucking farm. And they establish it that this is normal behavior. She knows how to ride. She has a riding outfit and riding boots and a helmet. But they let her get a pentagram tattooed on her foot.
I assume they didn't let her do that.
And let her be a practicing Wiccan, witch, what have you.
I assume she's keeps all that under the radar, because as you said, the parents do seem pretty strict. Like, they even, make comments about the way she's dressed and stuff. And
look at her bedroom! She has a copy, a paperback, mass-produced copy, nonetheless, of the Necronomicon in her bedroom. They don't bat an eyelash about their son smoking pot. Well, the mother does. It's just so uneven. I feel like these kids should be twins, but they're not. He's worried about language, but, that's okay. You can get underage tattooed.
I think they're just trying to make concessions.
Yes, instead of deciding a fixed way for the characters to be designed.
The parents do seem pretty perpetually stressed.
Yeah.
So.
Well, don't get me wrong. I mean, I like the character. It's just, as the film progresses, she very frequently shifts from acting like a scared, lonely, early teen to the independent, ready to strike out her own college student. And don't get me started on Ezra.
Yeah, I suppose he's almost like the Ami equivalent in this. Although he's not a farmhand, he's just like an old man that lives out in the woods near them.
He's an exposition machine. Everything he does in this film is done so that it can be referenced at another part in the film, just so you see something weird's going on. Like, they make a point to talk about his cat and to show his cat's collar, and then later on in the film, when there's an amalgam pile of dead animals that some hunters found, you get to see his collar in there.
Yeah. I mean, that's how setup and payoff works.
Yeah, but
I feel like the other ones are so old or so artsy or so cartoonish that they get away with a lot. Well, I feel like they did all this stuff worse than this one does. But I think it's just maybe being held to a higher standard because it tries to play it all straight.
Don't get me wrong, I give this movie a hard time, but I do like it. It's just so many things in this film just make me so angry. Or frustrated, not necessarily angry.
Yeah. Also, I really liked the time dilation stuff they did in this. I feel like that's a pretty... Even though that's not even really in the original story, it's a pretty Lovecraft thing, and I think it helps get that Lovecraft vibe in this, because that's one of the things that almost all the other adaptations were missing or did only a very weak job of, is getting that sort of this is beyond our comprehension vibe thing going on. And I feel like this gets that, where everyone is just constantly confused. You even have like that scene of the brother and sister being like, should we warn Dad? And they're like, warn him what?
I feel like in a lot of ways the characters are so, which, I mean, this is a more out there Nicolas Cage performance, so I feel like in a lot of ways the characters themselves borderline on the absurd so much that the color is the least thing you need to worry about. Like, I'm pretty sure that Nicolas Cage would have eventually went this crazy in this film had the meteor never showed up.
Yeah, I don't really agree with that. He seems pretty chill until he's drinking a lot of the meteor water.
He's really weird about those alpacas from the jump.
He's almost like super chill. He's quoting John Lennon. He's like, it's fine if the sun smokes weed. He's like a pretty chill dude up until about halfway through the movie.
Yeah, but then you get other scenes. Anything that has to do with the alpacas, for one. There was one scene in specific when the police come out to the house to check out the meteor, and he starts explaining what's happening. he like volunteers some completely unnecessary information that has no bearing on anything else in the story.
I think when he's like talking about his wife, or he's like saying like, oh, we were in the room having sex for the first time.
Yes, it was the first time since her visit.
Yeah, he's an awkward dude.
Yeah, very awkward.
I feel like that's consistent with his character too. He's always like saying stupid, like corny stuff during dinner. He's just on that note, I would say I was really worried going into this because you know, like we said earlier, Nicolas Cage, you never really know what you're going to get. And I was kind of surprised this was like one of his more subdued roles until the point where anybody would be acting like Nicolas Cage.
True.
So you do get one of his fits where he like goes out of the truck and is just doing the beating the steering wheel. But by that point, I think he's justified in it.
The mother and the father just feel so mismatched.
Yeah, I don't feel that. I thought they were good.
And I don't know if it's just him trying to take all of the pressure and responsibility off of her or not. But like when she talks about her brother Benny being in the woods with Ezra, his mom freaks out and she's like, he's smoking pot with that hippie in the woods. And he's just like, it's okay. It's just a hippie and some pot.
Yeah, well, yeah, he seems like the more laid-back, chill one, because the mom's also the one that gets onto the daughter about her outfit being a little much, and the mom's the one that's the more modern woman one, I guess, because she's always like online doing her stock trading stuff, and she seems like more of the warrior one.
I do give this film a hard time, but I could say that my most legitimate gripe in the film is the turn it takes in the last third, maybe, when it starts becoming a body horror film. Body horror doesn't do a whole lot for me, and it seems to take a large portion of the focus for a while, which works for the film, and I get it.
I suppose that I think we all know I love some good body horror. That's actually what I was about to start launching into, was how much I liked that.
Oh, now don't get me wrong. One of my favorite scenes in the film is when the mother's chopping carrots and the son's walking up behind her, the youngest child. The entire time I was watching this movie, initially, I could see what was coming from a mile away. I've seen tons of horror movies, but they played with that expectation, I felt. Because in my opinion, the son was going to tug on her shirt or something and spook her, and that was going to make her cut her finger. I did not expect for her to just keep chopping and chop two of her fingers off and then turn around like it was nothing. The
framing and the sound design had a, like, suspense ramping up, so you knew something was going to happen, but you didn't really know what it was right then. That did seem like the most likely thing, but you know, I was halfway expecting her to maybe like attack the kid or whatever, and you know, that was a pretty good scene, but I guess not spoiling too much, obviously all the body horror stuff that happens as it goes on with the farm animals and the family is really great in the back half of that for me.
Nicolas Cage is enjoyable the entire film.
Yeah, he's great in this.
Where he's milking the alpaca. Just the thought of drinking warm, unpasteurized milk, though. I don't understand the reasoning for using alpacas over any other animal in this film, because all it really serves to do for me is to make Nicolas Cage seem like more of a weirdo in the film.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they were just used because they're memorable. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or maybe they were making the movie and they had some animal, but it was easy for them to get alpacas when they were filming. I don't know. I'm happy it went out that way, though. Yeah, I guess going back to the main plot, I guess this is the only one that keeps the water surveyor a bit, but doesn't have any kind of... Well, no, the curse kept the water surveyor, but they were almost a side character in that. Will Wheaton was really more of the lead. And in this, that's kind of... There's not really a lead in this. It's like every character almost has equal importance in this until most of them are gone. But this one keeps pretty close. It doesn't like have the whole scientists analyzing the meteor bit from the original story that Farbe did, but it does keep it pretty close with just it being a farm with the gardeners living on it. Meteor comes down and makes the plants grow big but taste nasty and then gradually causes mutations. It's just, in this, the mutations are a lot more grotesque and horrifying than they are in most of the other adaptations or the original.
I feel too that all of the characters, with the exception of maybe Ward, they acknowledge the weird stuff going on, but 10 seconds later they just forget about it. Except for Ward, like the coffee with Ezra. What in the world would possess anybody to drink that? He's like, yeah, man, the water's a little brackish. No, there is slick oil floating in your coffee. That's not a little brackish. There is some kind of unknown gelatinous parasite in your coffee, dude. Quit drinking it immediately.
This one does also have the big like finale bit from the original story where the colors like seeping out of the well into the sky. I think this one probably does capture that better than any of the others. Farbe did it okay, but this one has a much more complete finale than most of the other adaptations do. Most of the others just kind of end, or the ending is the worst part of them. I think this one actually has a good ending.
I really wanted Lavinia to make it out. I like the ending for this film, aside from one thing. There is one scene near the end of the film that kind of takes it out of Lovecraftian territory to me. It makes the present seem too vested in the humans in the story. And it's when Ward comes back into the house and he sees Nicolas Cage sitting in the rocking chair after he's been shot, and the rest of the family like kind of poofs into existence on the couch, basically like a come and join us, you know, scene, and come and play with us. It wasn't bad, it kind of broke the whole Lovecraftian thing. Like, the chaos and the carnage that happens to humanity is almost always a byproduct of the antagonist in Lovecraft stories. There's noticeable differences in things like Herbert West Reanimator and the case of Charles Dexter Ward, because those you have a once human antagonist that has a definite reason for going after the partial protagonist or something.
I don't know, that scene I just interpret that almost as just like vestigial memories of them being represented or something. Almost like just the data of them was just being kind of half poured over as everything was happening. But I don't know, I think this one did the Lovecraft stuff so much better than the others that it probably gets it up to a point where people that are into that are probably going to be have much stronger opinions about it. All the other ones are like, they're so not near it that there's no point in even really talking about how Lovecraftian they successfully are.
Well, and one thing I wish they would have delved a little bit deeper into, when Lavinia goes to her room and she reads the Necronomicon and she carves all of the stuff into the palms of her hands and the little symbols she carves on her forehead. We don't really get anything else about that. Later on, it's like glowing, and she seems to have a connection to the creature.
Oh, yeah, I didn't interpret any of that. I thought she was just being dumb and maybe, you know, partially mentally impaired by the presence. And at the end, when they were glowing,
that's what I was initially thinking. But then at the end, near the end, when Ward comes back to the house, the symbol on her forehead is glowing, and her eyes are glowing, and she kind of shares the memory of the colors homeworld or what have you with Ward when he's trying to, you know, he grabs her because he wants to take her out of here, and we get that nice little scene, which I thought was done really well. It's probably the best scene of something like a Lovecraftian world to me since FYE's fantasy video.
I haven't thought about that in a minute. It's good though, yeah.
Oh, I love that. I love that at the end of that, when she swims through the bottom of the pool and she just sees this like weird landscape. And to me, that whole little like flashback scene where it's showing the colors home world or what have you, it did a really good job of making it look alien without relying on the tropes of what they use to present alien visually in a film.
Yeah. Well, I suppose since she was so much more into the supernatural than everyone else, her sanity probably ran out quicker than everyone else, so I suppose she would be more in tune with that stuff than the others near the end. But
yes, in game statistics...
I'm half joking about game statistics, yeah.
In game statistics, she had more power than the other characters in the film, but she had also spent way too much on spells to achieve what $20, a suitcase, and a Greyhound bus line would achieve. So once again, it goes back to the whole thing I was talking about, where is this a child? Is this a teenager? Is this a college student? Is she an adult? Is she what?
I suppose she's probably college-aged, but probably not very mature for her age. Probably due to being so isolated.
Oh, and the poor sheriff, man. Well, see, in the film establishes that this is a place they're familiar with. This is a place they've been.
No, I think they were only. I don't think they'd supposed to have been there for too long. But it was the father's. It was his dad's farm, and his dad had passed away, so they'd somewhat recently moved there.
But that's what I'm saying. But then when they talk about the alpacas, it makes it seem like they've only had the alpacas for like a month.
Yeah, I interpreted everything that they'd only been there for like a couple months.
There should have been more her riding the horse. I don't know. It just felt very Labyrinth. She just reminds me so much of Sarah from Labyrinth.
I didn't get those vibes, and I'm kind of glad I didn't. Although I definitely see what you're saying, at least in that opening scene.
And the film does a good job too, I think, of eliciting remorse on behalf of these characters as the movie progresses. Like, there's one scene the first time I watched the movie, it almost made me bust out laughing because I thought it was so ridiculous. Then when I watched the film again, I liked the scene a lot. When he's dragging Lavinia back into the house, Nicolas Cage, and they're getting to the top of the stairs, and she's like, "You're hurting me," and he like just kind of like has this mini breakdown. He's like, "No, I'm not that kind of person." The first time I watched it, I found that scene ridiculous. Like, I could not keep a straight face watching that scene. But then when I watched it again, it seemed almost as if he had a moment of clarity.
Yeah, that's how it seemed to me.
But then he drags her to the attic and throws her ass in there. Feed your mother!
Latter part of the movie, it just sort of seems like everyone is just sort of like rapidly alternating between multiple personalities, and I think that's part of the just unhinging that everybody's going through. I rewatched that with my brother and sister, and they lock the mom in the attic as you do, and they have that scene where later the one you were describing where he locks Lavinia in the attic. Then she's like knocking on the door, going no, and then she turns around, and then the mom just like chomp across the floor to her. That got a good spook out of my sister.
She was the one that didn't want to leave the room initially. Oh, that scene. Though I'm not the biggest fan of body horror, there are some truly disgusting scenes in this film. When she is lapping that water out of the bowl. Ugh.
I thought you were going to say when Nicolas Cage is kissing her.
That's pretty...
There's like that slime between their lips.
That whole scene where they're both just laying there, writhing in agony, going, in the sun.
Oh yeah, they just got her and the son on the couch just wailing, and they're just trying to have a conversation about what to do. And eventually, I think it's the son is just like, "Can we make them be quiet?"
Why are they making that noise?
Yeah, I really like the tone in that part of the movie. It's very uncomfortable.
I really expected more characters to make it through to the end as well, because they did a lot of work to develop these characters and make them very distinct, almost to a fault.
Yeah, I thought at least one more was going to make it.
I assumed Lavinia was going to, make it through to the end with her new little boyfriend. And that's another thing. Okay, so her mother isn't chastising her she's trying to have a very civil conversation with her when she's talking to her about Ward. She's like, "Oh, you like him, don't you?"
Oh yeah. I mean, she's trying to be helpful actually, but I mean, the daughter interprets it in a understandable way.
Once again, though, is this a 13-year-old girl and her mom's just cool with the adult man being the apple of her daughter's eye, or is she just treating her daughter like she's way too young?
Yeah, I think she's I think she's a college student, so I don't think she's treating her like that. Because she's like smiling when she's like, "Oh, so you like him?" And it's just when the mom says that, "Well, I mean, the way you're dressed is going to make him think you like him," and the daughter gets upset.
Well, she does kind of get slightly antagonistic there, because she's like, "You don't want to give off the wrong..." She's wearing shorts and a t-shirt.
Yeah, I know that she wasn't wearing anything that justified that attitude, but
yeah, well, and I mean, that's an antiquated way of thinking anyways. I mean, it doesn't matter if she walked out of the house in bra and panties. I mean, well, in this movie it would have made sense, I guess, especially later on.
I don't know.
I like how it plays with the father-daughter relationship a lot, because they seem at first to be really close, but then you can see that they've got a combative streak also, and it just keeps going back and forth, which to me is very realistic.
Yeah, I also like the brother-sister dynamic, how much they
antagonize each other.
but also how quickly they synergize in working together when they need to.
I love the escalation of the brothers' insults. It's always like leech, booger face, whore.
That's actually one part I didn't really like. Every time they did their like name calling exchanges, I rolled my eyes. It's fine though, I guess.
It's just a weird escalation because it would be like, ooh, you have cooties. Ooh, you've got acne. Oh my God, you're dying of HIV/AIDS. Or cancer, it's like the escalation is insane there.
I mean, some of them are like very like more sexual than I think siblings should be saying to each other. Like, she like says stuff about his dick, and he like calls her an axe wound. And, like, this doesn't really sound like siblings.
Honestly, I think it works for the film. It's very jostling. The way characters go from 1 to 60 and then back so easily. It gives you a very disjointed feel, and it kind of adds to the uncomfortable atmosphere. So it's something I pick at, but it's something I think also works in the film.
I don't think he said anything official, but Richard Stanley has said that he's leaning towards doing Dunwich Horror next.
Ooh.
But I guess we'll have to wait and see. Either way, I'm definitely going to be excited for it.
I would be super stoked if that's what they end up going with, simply because I want to see how they portray the Dunwich Horror, because, well, it's like The Color Out of Space. In the story for the Dunwich Horror, the creature's invisible. They actually have to use a spell book to create a dust so that they can see the creature, and even when they see it, it's not like a concrete, solid vision of the creature. It's not like it's invisible and this makes it visible. I want to see how they handle something so esoteric.
Yeah, if they do that, that's definitely... We'll probably end up having another episode like this where we just go over all the different Dunwich Horror adaptations.
Yes, we so should. I'm sorry. There should not be a mass-produced paper book copy of the Necronomicon.
I mean, but there is. It's on Amazon right now.
Not that Necronomicon.
I mean, I assume hers was trash also. I don't think she actually successfully did anything.
The symbol on the book is pulled right from the Lovecraft mythos. I don't know. I guess it was published by Chaosium or Arkham House. I don't know. I did like the little manus bug creature.
Mixed feelings about that. I didn't like it because I was worried that they were like creating that it seemed like that thing was the thing from the well. I was worried that was the angle that they were taking, but fortunately it just didn't. It just seemed to be just some random bug that was there. But yeah, I guess. Do you have anything else you want to say about the 2019 film?
It's a love-hate relationship. I'll say that much.
Well, I guess that covers all of them then. So, yeah, the original story just really seemed like it was capitalizing on like the scare of radiation now that they had a better understanding of it, and then just tied into some Lovecraft space mythos stuff near the end. All the different adaptations, very little is kept between all of them. I think the well might be in all of them, and that's probably the only fixed thing. But in general, the vibe that they all keep is just a family being contorted by some external thing, usually from space, and outside of Color from the Dark, where it's just a demon or something from the well.
Yeah.
And I think that whole just contortion of the familiar, especially the family, into becoming the monster is probably what makes it so appealing to people that they keep repackaging it in different forms.
If you haven't seen it, go see it.
Which one?
2019 one. It's on Shudder and Amazon. Farbe and Color from the Dark, I believe, are both on Amazon Prime.
I couldn't find Farbe on there, but Color from the Dark definitely is.
Find the curse and watch it.
It might be for if you pay for it, and it doesn't come with default Prime though. Yeah, I think the 2019 one is the only one I would hard recommend, but almost all the others I would recommend with caveats based on your tastes. Farbe and Color from the Dark are both a little more artsy and also both foreign films, so if you're okay with those, then I'd definitely recommend them. I guess The Curse and Die Monster Die are probably at the bottom of my list, but I think if you watch black and white horror movies, then I'm sure you'll be fine watching Die Monster Die, because it's decent until the end, and The Curse is just...
Yes.
Go in expecting for it to be rather silly and to not take it very seriously. Alright, well, I guess that wraps us up.
So thank you all for listening, and be sure to join us in the next episode when we go over the early Goosebumps books.
This concludes concludes today's episode of Here is the Horror. Subscribe and review Here is the Horror for free on the podcast service of your choice and on YouTube. You can also visit our website, here'sthehorror.com, and follow Here's the Horror on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
And you can also follow us at facebook.com/hereisthehorror, on Instagram at hereisthehorror, and on Twitter at hereisthehorror.
Have anything you want to say about horror films, games, or novels? Any topics that you would like us to discuss? Questions, comments, and suggestions can be sent via email to here'sthehorror@gmail.com. Please consider subscribing to Here's the Horror on Patreon. Every little bit helps to support the podcast, and patrons gain access to bonus episodes and more. The opening song is Nightmare Machine by Kevin MacLeod. The interstitial songs are Supernatural Radio by Kevin MacLeod, The Visitor by Shane Ivers, and Engulfed by the Night by Darren Curtis. The closing song is Dealing with the Devil by Darren Curtis.
And as always, thank you very much for listening, and remember, stay horrified.
Oh, never mind, I'm going to cut all that. I don't want to say that.
Some weird choices, but, it's based off the book, so.
Dimensions of Madness, blah, blah, blah. So many of the people I was looking into during the course of this were in Twilight Zone that I eventually decided to stop noting it.
I'm having a lot of trouble here trying to grok how to word what I'm trying to say. What are you eating?
The Chewy Chips Ahoy.
Oh yeah. The chewy ones? Yeah, we should be able to knock it out pretty soon. Oh god, we're at almost 2 hours.
Yeah.